Welcome to the Vietnamese Poetry, Literature channel. Today we will listen to the work, The Flag Embroidered with 6 Golden Words. Let's listen. Huy Van is young and highly intelligent. The flag has 6 words to determine success. Marquis Huy Van Tran Quoc Ton just had an interesting dream. He dreamed of capturing alive Sai Thung, the overbearing ambassador of the Yuan dynasty, who despised the South with half an eye. Last month, Sai Thung visited the embassy, casually passed through the Forbidden City, and blatantly rode his horse straight to Duong Min's gate. The guard at the door stopped him and Thung took a horsewhip and whipped the soldier's head. He relies on the position of being an official of a big country, sitting at the embassy as if he were at home. Lieutenant General Chu Min Vong Tran Quang Kai, the greatest Mandarin in the country, came to the embassy to ask for an audience. Sai Thung lay on the bed, not bothering to receive my prime minister. Then he forced the Mandarins to visit Kublai Khan. It demands that we pay tribute in silver, gold, and jewels, and demands that we pay people with excellent craftsmanship. Everyone was bruised. But because we didn't want to let anything happen, everyone had to swallow the bitterness. Huy Van couldn't stand it. Huy Van only thought about how to capture Sai Thung and cut it into pieces. Huy Van caught it without anyone from the Mandarins to the court knowing about it. How tied it up, slapped the horsewhip on its head, and shouted loudly. "Do you still dare to hit us again? Don't despise my little country Nam." Sai Thung bowed to Huy Van like a star. Huy Van built a crib and brought him back to the capital. Seeing him crying, Huy Van hugged his stomach and choked with laughter. At that moment, he suddenly woke up. He couldn't see Sai Thung anywhere, he only saw himself still lying in Lan Din Palace. Tran Quoc Ton rubbed his eyes, pushed aside the yellow cotton blanket and sat up. The inner hall was unusually quiet. Where are the Mandarins and princes? The red candle on the copper candle placed on a green enamel pedestal placed in the middle room, still burning, trembled in the early morning light that had flooded in. The large curtain stretched from the flower wall to near the door, where Huy Van House canopy was placed, was still hanging down. On the other side, the curtain was also closed. But the blankets were all overturned, revealing brocade mattresses pressed close together on stacked dragon beds. Dragon columns, parallel sentences, horizontal panels, and hammock doors sparkle with golden lipstick. Huy Van could still hear the voices of the Mandarins and princes talking, which continued until well past the second watch. Gratitude is as vast as the sky and sea. From the day Huy Van followed his uncle, Chu Ton Vong, back to the capital, the 2 uncles and nephews were kept in the Forbidden Palace by the Mandarins. Marquis can eat and drink with Mandarins and princes. At night, spread out long pillows, wide blankets, and put a bed together. It's really like 4 tanks in one house, no division between top and bottom. For that grace, even though his heart was muddled, Huy Van had to think about repaying it. Unfortunately, he is still considered a child whose first blood is not yet drained. Every time Huy Van intervened in the conversation, the princess said, "I'm still young, I don't know the important military matters yet." Respecting his uncles, Huy Van blushed and remained silent. One day, Quoc Ton boldly said, "You're really young. But if the Nguyen army comes to rob our country, then I will also follow you guys to fight the enemy." The princes laughed. Uncle Chu Ton Vong said, "You have a heroic spirit. That's the Dong family's lineage. But now you have to study first, to be good at literature and good at martial arts before you can fight the enemy." The princes turned back to state affairs, not paying attention to Huy Van. And this early morning, where did the Mandarins and princes suddenly go without letting the Marquis know? Looking at the empty inner palace, Huy Van was so angry that he cried. He opened the deep doors and jumped down the steps. "All right. Wherever the princes are, we will find them. State affairs are common affairs, we are not allowed to discuss them, we can discuss them anyway. Let's see whose gut is big and whose sword is sharp. Let's see if we can get the enemy general's head or not. That was a young man, no, that was more like a teenager, because Hou Van was not yet 16 years old. The clothes were loose and not tight on her slim body. The sleeves of the martial arts style shirt are too wide for the wrist. Almost having troubles like an adult. But the tuft of hair is still too small for a keen eye to see it. Two short strands of hair hang around the back of the neck and cheeks. Speaking of which, Hou grew up quickly, like all the Tran family's sons. With a tall and slender body, with neat clothes, with a large sword at his side, and with agile and courageous steps, Hou Van makes those who first see him think he is a former prince. Rush into 100 battles. But when you look at him in person, no one can mistake him. Oval face with plump cheeks full of milk. Smooth white skin glistening with downy hairs. Thick red lips. Big black eyes, blue whites, both clear and dreamy. The slightly curved eyebrows above his eyes make him look more elegant. Almost as pretty as a girl. Many princes and princesses wish to be as beautiful as Hou Van. But Hou Van doesn't like that effeminate beauty. He wanted to have the majestic majesty of Hung Dao Vong, the intelligence of Chu Min Vong, and the excellent health of Vong Bao Nia. He wanted to have bones, bronze, skin, and iron. He wanted to rush into the midst of thousands of spears, slash generals, and capture the flag as easily as his hands. Quoc Ton ran like a shot through how many gardens, how many lakes, how many fake mountains, how many castles and palaces, Hou did not know. Again. Hou ran all the way out of the Forbidden City, found the inn of his followers, and asked, "Has your excellency come out yet?" One person said, "Your Majesty came here, but then left early in the morning." "Where are you going?" "Bam, if the prince doesn't know, how can we know?" "I only saw his lordship marching his troops to the ferry wharf." "Your excellency told us to tell the prince to return to Vo Nin immediately, lest the lady stay at home waiting for him." "The lady let her go for a month, but the prince has been in the capital for 2 months already." Hou Van pursed his lips in anger. "You took me back to the capital, but now you tell me to go home alone, what does that mean?" Hou Van says, "I write a letter. Someone brought it back to her, telling her that I hadn't come back yet to calm down and kiss. I still have to go see your lordship first." After delivering the letter to someone to carry, Hou Van jumped on his horse and, along with his servants, rushed out of Thang Long Citadel. Through stories overheard in the palace, Quoc Ton guessed that the mandarins had come to Bin Than Wharf to discuss state affairs with princes from all 4 directions. Hou Van swung his whip and whipped his horse, crouching on the saddle, shouting at everyone to gallop. No matter how much Hou Van insisted, the Ton Duc army would not let him disembark. Hou stood on the shore, blankly looking at Bin Than Wharf. 2 ancient banyan trees cast cool shade, covering an entire section of the river. Below the wharf, the large boats of the princes returning to the Monks' Association were docked close together, painted in all colors. On the bow of the boat, the flags of the princes fluttered. The flags of Chu Min Vong, Chu Quoc Vong, Chu Van Vong, Hung Dao Vong, and Chu Ton Vong, my uncle. The boats of the kings with the highest positions of authority in the court are all near the royal boats. The royal boat is the tallest, carved into the shape of a large, brilliant golden dragon. On both sides are fan flags, golden canopies, purple canopies, and sacred staffs of the Son of God. After all, the boats of the great kings were the boats of the lower-level kings, then the boats of the marquis, and finally the boats of the guards. Hou Van's eyes stared at the boats of Hung Vo Vong, Hung Tri Vong, Hung Hu Vong. It turned out that Hung Dao Vong's sons were all present. Those cousins are only a few years older than Hou Van. My father passed away early, so I have to stand humiliated like this. Hoi Van's eyes widened to tears, looking at the flags flying and dancing on the boats as beautiful as brocade and flowers. Through the windows with barred bars and hanging dragon boat curtains, Hoi Van saw the princes sitting and discussing state affairs with the mandarins. Hoi Van doesn't know what you're talking about. But no matter what we discuss, Hoi Van is sure that it will be no more than the big task of lending the Nguyen army a way to attack Champa or resist it. The enemy's ambition has been clear for 2 years now. It pretended to borrow money, but in reality it was to steal the life of the South. There's only fighting. Why do we have to come all the way here and discuss it over and over again? Alas! At this time, Hoi Van was allowed to board the dragon boat and discuss state affairs. He will kneel before the Mandarin, and ask him to let him fight. The dragon boat was silent. Canopies, flags and ceremonial items are printed in golden yellow on the clear river water. From time to time, I see people from the inner city kneeling outside, offering betel and areca nuts and offering medicine. Hoi Van wanted to push the Ton Duc soldiers to run to the wharf but was afraid of being beheaded. He wanted to shout loudly, "Please let the Mandarin beat you," but he was afraid of blasphemy. After a few months in the capital, seeing the Nguyen envoy making all kinds of decisions, Hoi Van only had one thought: fight, fight to keep the country. Then came the day when the mandarins invited elders from all over the world to return to the capital so that the king could ask the people's opinion whether they should let the enemy borrow the road or should fight back. The elders are simple country people, have never stepped foot into the royal or purple floors, and have never discussed state affairs, yet when they heard the mandarin's question, they all held their hands, tensed their faces, and affirmed. Shouted, "Please attack," with 100 words, shaking the entire Dien Hong Palace. Those cloth-clad people still know right and wrong, not to mention that I, being a noble person, can't think like them. When it comes to them, the mandarins still ask questions. Why am I the closest person, but the mandarins don't ask a word? All day yesterday, Hoi Van rode his horse to find the king, forgetting to eat or drink. Today, waiting from early morning until noon, Hoi Van felt hungry, his eyes were dizzy, his head was dizzy, and his limbs felt sad. Hoi Van couldn't stand it anymore. "How long will you stand here?" "Well, then risk death. Let's just go down, just say 2 words to ask for a beating, then let the court impeach you." Hoi Van pushed several Ton Duc soldiers to the ground, falling onto the wharf. A panicked general ran forward and grabbed Hoi Van's shirt. Quoc Ton unsheathed his sword, his eyes glaring wildly. "Don't let go, I'll cut you." Soldiers rushed in to hold Hoi Van. In fact, because they respected him as a prince, they had let him stand there since morning. Now seeing that Hoi Van overreached, the general said, "The military method is useless, the Marquis has no duty here, so go back and let your brothers do the work. If you disregard the laws of the country, you must follow the superior's orders." Hoi Van's face turned red and he shouted loudly, "I went down to ask for an audience with the mandarins, no one can hold me back. Just look at this sword." The general turned pale and called out to his soldiers to surround Hoi Van. Quoc Ton waved his sword wildly, no one dared to come close. The cries and screams disturbed the whole riverbank. Just then, the meeting under the dragon boat adjourned. King Thu Bao and many princes went out to admire the river scene. Hearing the noise on the wharf, the king and the princes looked up and saw Hoi Van struggling with a group of Ton Duc soldiers. King asked, "What's up there?" Quoc Ton looked down at the wharf and saw King Thu Bao standing with his dragon's head under a golden canopy. The king was still very young, his face was as red as a ripe gac. Standing behind the king is Hung Dao Vong, tall and tall, with a long silver-spotted beard flying in the wind. Chu Ton Vong hurriedly ran ashore and asked his grandson, "Aren't you afraid of death? Why did you come here? Who told you?" Hoi Van says, I heard that the Prince of Heaven was meeting with the princes here, so I came. I am not yet old enough to discuss state affairs. Inside is the love of blood relatives, casual, intimate with each other no matter what. But going out is a matter of state, there is hierarchy, there are rules, it cannot be taken lightly. It's not right for you to come here on your own. If you cause trouble with the Ton Duc army, that's a death penalty. You also have to suffer. Why didn't you listen to me and go back to your hometown to worship your mother, but instead came here without any reason to cause this terrible disaster? Hoi Van bowed his head and said, I know it's a big sin. But I secretly think that when the country changes, even the child has to worry, let alone when he is an adult. I'm not yet old enough to discuss state affairs, but I'm not like a plant or tree that can sit still. When the king is worried, his subjects also have to worry. My father passed away early, so I was raised by my uncle. You often taught me loyal things, I still keep them in mind. I risked my life to come here, just wanted to contribute a few words. Dear uncle, do you know what the mandarins and kings are planning to serve? Let it borrow your way or fight back. That is still being discussed. There are people who fight. There is a peacemaker. Quoc Ton stood up, his eyes sparkling. Who controls the peace? Who controls the peace? Lend it your way? Don't you know that's his plan to destroy Quack? Offering this brocade to the enemy, why are you discussing it like that? Quoc Ton rushed down to the wharf, knelt down to pay his respects to the king, his voice like a scream. Please allow me to fight. Lending sugar to the enemy means losing the country. Having finished speaking, Hoi Van trembled, put the sword on his neck and apologized. Thu Bao nodded, smiled at Hung Dao Vong, and Hung Dao Vong also nodded. Hoi Van's words were in accordance with the king's and Hung Dao's thoughts. But among the princes, there was one whose face darkened. That is King Chu Quoc Ik Tak. Ik Tak is a peacemaker. Chu Quoc Vong said. Marquis Hoi Van disturbed the country's laws. If you want to rule the country, you must first rule your loved ones. I beg the Mandarin to let me behead him to comply with military orders. Hoi Van bowed his head to the ground. Next to Hoi Van, Chu Ton Vong also knelt to apologize. Thu Bao said, Marquis Hoi Van violated the country's law, that crime should not be tolerated. But Hoi Van was still young, his feelings were pitiful, and he knew how to care for the king and the country, his ambition was worthy. The king ordered the two uncles and nephews to stand up, and continued. Adults already take care of the country's affairs. Marquis Hoi Van should return to his hometown so that his wife will have someone to rely on day and night. The emperor rules the world with filial piety, so my brother should not neglect his duties as a son. Just then, a servant passed by carrying a tray of food. Thu Bao picked up a ripe orange on the tray and told his wife to give it to Hoi Van. King said, all the princes who come here have their share of oranges. Is it possible that Hoi Van does not enjoy it? So give me a reward. Hoi Van caught the orange, thanked the king, and slowly walked ashore. Behind there was the laughter of Thu Bao and the princes. I could clearly hear the laughter of the princes who were only a few years older than me. The king gave precious oranges. But attending the table is still not allowed. Hoi Van was angry and sad. Worst of all, the Ton Duc army also giggled and mocked. Hoi Van scowled and clenched his fists. All right. I will always recruit soldiers to lead the army to fight the enemy. See if this guy who has to stand on the sidelines is a loser. Hoi Van's teeth clenched tightly. His hands clenched even tighter, as if to crush something. His hands shook with anger. Hoi Van muttered. Then see who can kill the enemy, who can repay the king's favor, see who is better and who is worse. Then the court will know my hand. Hoi Van's fists squeezed harder. When the family members saw Hoi Van coming out, they rushed over to ask what was going on. To avoid embarrassment with them, Hoi Van boldly said, "I told the Mandarin to let him fight. The Mandarin gave this orange. Thanks to the king and the country, I brought it back to give to my mother." Tran Quoc Ton opened his right hand. The orange was crushed and left only ash. Returning to his private residence, Hoi Van ran upstairs to greet his mother. His clothes were covered in dust, his forehead was wet with sweat. The lady sat on the bed, her hands warmed on the incubator, her mouth sobbing because of the cold. The lady asked, "Where are you? Why did you come home alone? Why did you go away for so long and leave me at home waiting for you?" Hoi Van looked at his old mother, both loving her and feeling sorry for himself. Lady said, "Let me sit. It's cold like this. Where are you going with your clothes all disheveled, your face bewildered, and sweating like that, child?" Hoi Van told his mother all his feelings and said, "I stayed in the capital for 2 months, and every day I saw Envoy Nguyen walking around domineeringly, doing scandalous things. It forces people to pay money. It requires finding the Ma Vien bronze pillar. The bronze column has been buried, where can I find any traces? He forced me to send my children as hostages. He forced him to appoint an official to supervise everything of the royal court." The lady cried softly. "How dare he be so disrespectful? How does the court discuss? The officials have rejected everything. It read the edict of its king and forced officials to bow. Has there ever been a life like that?" But the Mandarin refused. The Mandarin is truly a saint, a king of a small country who refuses to submit to the might of a big country. "Dear mother, now the Yuan army is teetering outside the gate. The crown prince of the Yuan dynasty has sent a letter, demanding to borrow our country's route to attack Champa, and demanding that we provide food. Lending him sugar is putting meat into the hungry tiger's mouth, Mom." Having said this, Hoi Van knelt before the bridge and said, "I want to ask Mom something." "What do you ask Mom?" "Mother, when you see the nation's disgrace and keep silent, it is cowardly. When you see a national disaster and endure it, that is not bravery. I am not allowed to participate in the discussion of state affairs, but I do not want to sit idly by and watch the enemy invade the country. The princes all love their young children. The Mandarins told me to return and take care of my mother. But the thief thought that the enemy's invasion was only a matter of morning and night. I also want to follow the example of the princes, raising soldiers and horses, accumulating salaries to fight evil enemies, and save the country. Mom, help me so that I can follow in my father's footsteps and not be known as a boy in a time of chaos." The lady stared at her only son. The child is as delicate as a woman, as weak as a flower petal that cannot withstand the wind and frost. The lady shuddered, thinking back to 30 years ago. The Yuan army had come over, horses filled the fields. Wherever the enemy went, grass could not grow, fields were bare, villages were burned, and buffaloes and cows were gone. By the time the enemy was chased away, people died like straw, the country was devastated, and the capital turned into ashes. At that time, his lordship had to put himself into a circle of smoke and fire. The wife led her mother-in-law to run around, experiencing many hardships. Now, if I get angry again, it will be a scene of broken flesh, broken bones, bleeding heads, and people's lives like trash. The lady is old and has weak arms and legs. Can she run? In the past, as a wife, I did not dare to expect her lord to stay with her. But now that I'm a mother, can't I tell my child to stay home and help me? The mother shivered and closed her eyes. My son's strength is like a weak willow, so he can't fight a pack of wolves. Quoc Ton asked, "What do you think?" "Let me think. The enemy will come without knowing when. If I didn't expect it, I wouldn't be able to do it in time, Mom. Wait until your uncle comes home, I'll ask how it is." Kwok Tone shook his head resolutely. The mother said, "My son. My father passed away early. Before he closed his eyes, his father told him to take care of him. My mother is a dutiful girl, I have to ask my uncle about everything. Please sit up so I can ask you something." Kwok Tone still knelt before the collapse. He said, "Mom asked me, but my uncle wouldn't let me go. Essence's mother. Mom will definitely go. I swear to my mother that I will behead the evil enemy and avenge the country." The mother already knows her child's personality. It's like the old monk, once he decides, he carries it out. Besides, if my mother taught me the way of loyalty and patriotism, would she stop me from keeping my position as a servant? Lady said, "I'm not the one who wants you to keep filial piety but lose loyalty." Kwok Tone grinned, his mouth as fresh as a flower was still as sullen and easy to cry as any innocent child's mouth. The lady tried to hold back the tears from her eyes. "I just love you so much when you're young." Hoi Van's face turned pale. "I'm not a kid anymore. I already know how to think. I have no weapons in my hand, my family is only a few dozen people, how can I fight the enemy?" Hoi Van's voice became firm. "If you help me, great things will happen. Mommy. Where is your father's armor? Where is your father's military letter?" The mother's eyes lit up. The lady pursed her mouth and shook her head slightly, then nodded again. The lady only saw the slender shadow of her son running out into the yard and jumping up to the Monsignor's staircase, which for 12 years the lady had kept locked. The lady called the old general who had followed her lord to the battlefield in the past, and asked, "Now Marquis Hoi Van wants to raise troops to fight the enemy. I'm afraid my child is still young. What do you think?" The old general said, "The prince has great ambition, truly worthy of being the son of a tiger general. When he was born, he only prayed to God to make him become a talented martial artist. I teach literature, I know my child's strength, but what about his martial arts? The prince is very diligent in learning martial arts, he can dance with the sword quite quickly, draw the bow quite strongly, and can't get tired of riding his horse." The lady gave the old general 3 ounces of silver and said, "I reward you for teaching my child. But my son is still young and not used to fighting. I ask you to help my son become a strong martial artist. When my son goes to war, you follow him." The old general bowed and said, "In the past, we followed your lordship and now we follow your prince. Please rest assured, ma'am. I'm over 70 now, but I'm still strong. I will help the prince go wherever the enemy goes." When Chu Tan Vong returned to the hamlet at the Bindon conference, he learned that his sister-in-law had agreed to let Hoi Van go fight the enemy. Vong quickly ran over. Vong said, "Now that I'm back, first I'm going to pay my respects from the road, then I'm going to greet my sister, and then I'm going to pay my respects to more soldiers. I only stayed at home for a few days and then returned to the capital to wait for my fate. We take care of the country's affairs, but we have to rely on you to take care of the housework. I heard that you let Tone recruit soldiers to fight the enemy. I think like this, your intelligence is commendable, but your age is too young. The enemy army was fierce and good at fighting. Even we have gone into battle but we still feel worried, let alone you already know what military work is. Besides, in our family, my brother passed away early and my sister's death was too late. Continuing the family line in the future depends on Tone's grandson. If he has any fate, what will we say when we are 100 years old when we go down to the Golden Stream to meet you? As you wish, I have to keep you at home. She is old. If tomorrow comes a difficult situation, I must have my grandchild by my side to help me sooner or later. I swore to this day that I would die, not knowing if I would ever see you again. Before I go, I would like to discuss this with you." Lady said, "I am not blessed with longevity, but luckily I still have you. Everything in the house depends on you. I also think like you. But how can I tell you? Only when a child is bad will he be admonished and admonished. Now I would like to go serve the king and help the country. You have taught me to study the scriptures and history. How can I tell you to act against the teachings of saints and sages? What do you think? Please advise me. The two sisters sat and talked for a long time. Both of their foreheads wrinkled. Finally, Chu Tanvong said, I'm just worried that he's still young, not yet literate, not good at martial arts, and not strong enough to handle scenes of mist and snow. But since you're an adult, we don't have to discuss it at length. But I have a way. Let me tell you. Vong and a few attendants went to Tran Quoc Ton's training ground. Since returning home, Hoai Van practiced all day long on a large beach with many high and low mounds located next to a stream. Hoai Van practiced jumping over mounds, swimming underwater, carrying rocks, cutting big trees, riding horses and throwing arrows. Hoai Van came out here at dawn, only to return in the late afternoon. When Chu Tanvong arrived at the training ground, he saw Quoc Ton shirtless and wearing a loincloth, revealing his white skin. Crowded around were the village's young men, also wearing loincloths, shirtless, and completely black. The old general also sat among the animals. Seeing King Chu Tan, the old general bowed down. Hoai Van is busy with a village brother. This guy was lying on the ground. Hoai Van lay on top, but struggled forever, unable to turn the other guy over. Hoai Van's shoulders and back were red and marked with the opponent's finger marks. Chu Tanvong stood and watched, his eyes irritated, and he said loudly, Pull up the hooves. Fighting unknown pieces. Tone hits the hook, quickly. Only then did Hoai Van know that he was coming, so he quickly let go of his friend and collapsed and bowed. King Chu Tan told Hoai Van, Wrestling is our family's profession. You love wrestling so much, I'm very happy. But wrestling is a game and you are still so confused, then when you actually fight the enemy, you will still be confused. Now I try wrestling with you. If you can help me, I will be willing to let you go fight the enemy. Everyone thought that the high-ranking king was joking. Unexpectedly, Vong took off his shirt and put on a loincloth. Vong is over 40 years old, but his body is plump, his muscles are as hard as iron, and his body is as strong as a rock. Vong smiled and leisurely walked in to dig things. Hoai Van is as excited as a fighting cock. Hoai Van says, If you allow me, I will serve you as a gift. The two uncles and nephews fought together on the tiller. Quoc Ton's hand caught his uncle's hand like a stick hitting a stone. The father suddenly broke through, Hoai Van was knocked down and his stomach was empty. But the guy was still eager to ask for more. The uncle laughed. I praise you for being a brave person, losing without getting discouraged. But I still have to practice a lot, I can't fight the enemy yet. Do you know that every Yuan army is as strong as Trong Phai? In the past, Han Tin couldn't tie up a chicken, how could he beat Hang Vu who had the power to conquer mountains? Han Tin is a great general, we should not compare. As mentioned, to go to war, you must have excellent health like An Bo and Bon Viet. What other subjects do you practice? Do you know that the Nguyen army rode horses without holding the reins, sat on the horse like we walk on the ground, and had the ability to shoot 100 shots and hit 100 times? I would like to give it a try. Hoai Van led him to the shooting range, then put on his bow and arrows, jumped on his horse, and ran far away until he looked at the bull's eye, which was only as small as a grain of rice. Quoc Ton looked straight at the bull's eye, raised his bow, loaded his arrows, and fired 3 shots, all of which hit. Everyone cheered and praised. The old general also smiled, his face blooming. Chu Tanvong nodded. You shot well, I'm happy for you. But you have to practice more before you can fight the enemy. Watch me shoot here. Vong jumped on his horse and ran farther than Tran Quoc Ton. Vong still rode his horse, didn't turn around, just turned around and raised his bow and arrows. The arrow hit and was so strong that Tran Quoc Ton's arrows that were stuck in the bull's eye all fell to the ground. When Vong turned his horse back, everyone bowed, admiring Vong's shooting skills. Vong told Hoi Van, "I hope you grow up and become a good servant. But now that I'm still young, I don't yet measure my strength, and if I keep fighting the enemy, I'm afraid I'll bring harm to myself. I say that so you know my stomach." The king told the old general, "You should help him practice more. I have to go to war, I can't stay home and take care of my grandchildren." Suddenly I saw a long hole to practice jumping. Vong smiled and asked, "Is it this short?" Chu Tan Vong and everyone dug a hole 2 meters long. In the pit, Vong placed many spears and sharpened bamboo, some high and some low. After finishing, Vong jumped over the hole, as light as a squirrel, his face calm and motionless. Everyone shook their heads and stuck out their tongues. Hoi Van decided to jump. The old general stopped him. Chu Tan Vong said, "Try to practice more and then dance. How can you be as fast as lightning, your heart as calm as the blue sky, jumping over thorns like nothing? Then when facing fierce enemies, you will not lose your morale, have you heard?" After Vong left, everyone still admired Vong's health. Hoi Van asked the old general, "Have you seen me go to war yet? How can I be equal to my uncle?" The prince is not worried. The prince has not practiced much, so he must be less than the king who has practiced so hard. There is a saying in the proverb, "If you work hard, you will make money one day." Prince, please practice and practice. If you have the will, you will succeed. Must practice quickly. The enemy has arrived. I will study day and night. I have decided that no matter how hard it is, I will not lose heart. When Chu Tan Vong raised the flag, the men and women flocked under the flag in large numbers like a gathering. Those who had followed Hoi Van also fled to join Chu Tan Vong. After arranging the team, Vong raised his army and set out loudly. Hoi Van said to the old general, "All the young men have followed you. Where to get more troops?" The old general said, "Can people ever end? If you want people to believe, you must have a good reputation. Just like I want, we have to take the trouble to go into the villages and make it clear to everyone about the great meaning. Which folk do not have patriotic loyalty? I know that in Vo Ninh, we have many elders who were invited by the emperor to Dien Hong Palace to ask for advice. We should meet those people. The elders were determined to fight the enemy, so why didn't they pretend to tell their family members from outside the village to follow the prince? Don't worry if you don't have any troops." Quoc Ton was very happy and said, "You have lifted a cloud for me." From then on, Hoi Van went down to the villages every day, mobilizing people to stand up and save the country. One day, it was very late, Hoi Van still had the lights on upstairs. Quoc Ton thought, when he raised the flag, people were excited to come. We must also have a flag. The flag clearly states our will. From dusk to the second watch, Hoi Van asked himself, what words will I write on my flag? The title must be as bright and clear as day. The title must be a strong oath. The inscription must make soldiers excited and terrify the enemy. The drum has struck the third watch. Hoi Van's eyes suddenly lit up, his whole body seemed to be on fire. Hoi Van's hand was raised as if waving a flag. Hoi Van shouted loudly, "Pha Quang Dik Bao Hoang In." Hoi Van repeated in his mind, "Destroy the enemy's strength and show the king's grace. Report the king's grace, destroy the enemy's strength. Destroy enemy strength." He nodded, happily. The 6 words contrast harshly, the words are sharp, the meaning eloquent. He used all his strength to write 6 words on a piece of cashew paper. He dreamily saw the six-letter flag flying across the battlefields, and he was pointing his spear and swinging his sword to behead the enemy general. Hoi Van was about to jump down the stairs to show off his new discovery to the old general, when suddenly there was the sound of light footsteps going upstairs. When Quoc Ton saw it, it was his mother. He held out his hand to help his mother up. The lady asked softly, "It's almost morning, why are you up so late? I see you becoming stronger day by day. Where's the shirt that's so stylish? Quoc Ton has lost a lot of weight." Hao only wore a thin undershirt because Hao wanted to train himself to be a person who could weather the wind and rain, and endure all the hardships of the battlefield. Quoc Ton helped his mother sit on the couch and said, "You made me worry, you are truly guilty of being unfilial. But the enemy is about to come, even if you want to stay still, you can't. You have to practice suffering to get used to it." The lady took the red paper in her child's hand. On the piece of paper were written 6 large words: "Destroy the enemy's strength, report the king's grace," with sinewy pen strokes. The lady did not speak, but silently looked at the 6 words, secretly happy for her son's unusual will. Quoc Ton says, "I want to erect a flag with these 6 words to raise soldiers. Tomorrow when I go into battle, I will wave that flag and swear to live and die with the enemy. Mom, please make me that flag. When I go into battle, I look at the flag and see my mother." The lady patted her child's head, and Hoi Van laid his head on his mother's pillow. Lady said, "If you don't keep me at home, I can't give you a flag. Okay, go to sleep. Light and." The lady led Quoc Ton to the bed, told him to lie down, and pulled the blanket over him. The mother held the lamp and lightly walked downstairs. Returning to her private room, the lady turned on the lamp and busily embroidered 6 words with golden threads on a piece of crimson silk. A few days later, in front of the old palace of the great king, Father Tran Quoc Ton, a flag was erected. The red flag has 6 brilliant golden words, breaking the division of the division Hoang In. Everywhere near and far, people talk about the flag. People admire Hoi Van at a young age but with great ambition. An old man led 2 young men to the front of the palace, bowed to Hoi Van, then pointed to the 2 boys and said, "One is the youngest son, the other is his grandson, they are all about the prince's age." Both of them admired Hoi Van Hao's reputation and wanted to carry the whip and follow the horse's heels. When he returned to the capital, he was determined to fight the enemy. "Because of weak health, I could not go, but my children and grandchildren went instead. I hope Hoi Van Marquis accepts it. I would like to wish the prince this time of his army success wherever he goes." From then on, many people came under the flag to follow Quoc Ton, most of whom were of the same age as him. Tran Quoc Ton and his new friends passionately practiced martial arts and learned how to fight in battle. Not long after, Hoi Van jumped over the 2-foot-long hole, the pit's interior bristling with spikes. One day, he pointed to a flock of starlings flying in the sky and said to everyone, "Let's shoot down the 3rd one." And he drew his bow and shot, and the 3rd starling fell. But the number of people following Hoi Van was only 600. Seeing Hoi Van's concern, the old general said, "The troops are good, not precious much. We only have 600 soldiers, but we all have the will to fight and go without worrying about anything. They practice agility, tell one thing, know 2 things. Everyone is looking forward to the day when they will repay the king's debt to the country. I just ask the prince to treat them as brothers, regardless of rank or inferiority, they will treat him as his own blood. One heart and one heart won't win any fight." Hoi Van praised rightly. The old general arranged 600 men into that team, neat as the army of an ancient king. Quoc Ton went around the bases and teams, eating with them on a plate, lying on a mat with them, practicing together during the day, and studying military books together at night. They live together like brothers, their relationship becomes more and more intense every day. The lady spent money to sew clothes and buy weapons for the young army. Folks throughout the Vo Ninh region admired the army, some offered good horses, some offered buffaloes and cows, some brought money and rice to greet the army. People raced to fight more knives and swords for Hoi Van. The smithy bellows do not rest. The sound of hammers and anvils thunders day and night. A year has passed. Then one day, Hoi Van was practicing with 600 famous men, when there was a rumor that the crown prince of the Nguyen dynasty, Tran Nam Vong Thot Hon, commanding 50,000 soldiers and horses, had broken into the gate. The army fought with the enemy. 600 people gesticulated, begging Hoi Van to hurry up and leave. One cold December morning. Gray clouds covered the sky. The wind howled every time. In the middle of the training ground, a red flag embroidered with 6 golden letters fluttered proudly, dispelling the gloomy atmosphere. On a raised platform, an incense burner is placed. On the incense burner, agarwood emits fragrant smoke. On both sides of the altar, 600 noble men stood solemnly, holding straight, even spears with bright sharp tips. Everyone held their breath. In silence, the gong and drum suddenly vibrated. Dressed neatly, Hoi Van stepped onto the altar and knelt before the incense burner. The old general lit more incense and incense. Hoi Van mumbled a prayer to heaven and earth to protect the South, and loudly recited the oath, adapting the oath he had heard the Mandarin recite at Dong County Temple in the capital. We, 600 righteous soldiers, with love like blood, loyalty like glue, vow to live together, chase away the enemy and save the people. Whoever is unjust and unfaithful, may heaven and earth destroy him. 600 great men recited the oath. Whoever is unjust and unfaithful, may heaven and earth destroy him. And they drank blood and swore. They looked at the red flag embroidered with 6 golden words, their hearts burned, their hands seemed to be able to turn the heavens and the earth. That night, it was very late, people could still hear the sounds of sword sharpening. The next morning, Hoi Van Hao woke up early and went upstairs to say goodbye to his old mother. I went on this trip and swore to live and die with the enemy. When will the country be peaceful and the 4 corners of the world be quiet and peaceful? I will return. Mom, please stay at home and keep your pearls and gold so that I can have peace of mind to go into battle. Hoi Van bowed to his mother. The lady was attached and did not want to break up, but she did not shed tears. Lady said, I left for the country, so my mother didn't keep it. Mom, I'm the only one here. I hope you will soon sing a triumphant song, and we can reunite soon. This is the second time in his life that Hoi Van is away from his mother. The last time I returned to the capital, it was just an outing. This time I really went far away, I don't know when I will return. Hoi Van's heart suddenly felt a pang of love for his mother. But the gongs and drums outside were bustling. Hoi Van bowed to his mother again, lifted the curtain and walked out into the yard, which was still dim. Marquis Hoi Van wore a red robe, a bow and arrow on his shoulder, an heirloom sword on his back, and sat on a white horse. He maintained the majesty of a commander. Following Hoi Van was an old general, his face darkened by wind and frost, his beard as long as white as a whisker. Next were 600 heroic men with pointed hats and long spears. The army marched aggressively on a small main road, with empty fields on both sides. The sound of gongs and drums. The army has gone far. The people who came out to say goodbye can still see the red flag with 6 golden words marking the way ahead. The flag was raised against the wind. The flag embroidered with 6 golden letters became more and more tense because of the wind. 600 noble men went to look for the officers. But where are the officers? They don't know anymore. Hoi Van says. Now even if you find the military officer will just chase you back. It's better to go find the enemy and fight a few battles to let the adults know what our brothers are doing. 600 men answered. The prince is right. We go find the enemy to fight. And they headed north. And the red flag was raised because it was against the wind. Vo Ninh fields are gone. They entered the hilly area. Soon, the hills also receded. They entered the middle of the forest and mountains. The forests are increasingly denser, the mountains are increasingly higher, the streams are increasingly numerous, and the people are increasingly sparse. They feel the closer they go, the closer they get to the front. Their hearts are as happy as Tet. But after several days and nights of walking, they still saw no sign of the enemy. Eyes only see dark mountains and forests. Ears only hear the sound of bucks calling and gibbons howling. One afternoon, after a strenuous day of wading streams and climbing passes, 600 brave men poured into a large field surrounded by mountains on all four sides. Halfway up the mountain, there are a few scattered indigenous villages. Hoi Van let everyone rest at the foot of a high mountain and prepare food. Suddenly there were loud drum sounds. From halfway up the mountain, crossbows shot down like rain. The army was startled and confused, hiding in bushes and hollows. Hoi Van shouted, "Team up, follow me to kill the enemy and achieve success." Hoi Van sat on a horse, under a 6-letter flag. He asked the old general on horseback standing next to him, "Where are the officers and soldiers to let the enemy get here?" But the old general seemed thoughtful. Hoi Van looked up the mountain and saw silhouettes of people in green shirts, wide hats, and large swords strapped to their backs. They screamed in horror. They moved as if they were about to strike down. Hoi Van ordered, "Wait for the enemy troops to get close, then rush forward and attack." The crossbow still shoots down the fence. On the mountain, suddenly a person stood up straight, taller than the others. Apparently that was their leader. It made a few scary sounds, and the green-shirted army climbed down, as light as air. Hoi Van raised his bow and loaded arrows to shoot the leader. The old general held back and said, "Wait. It's not necessarily an enemy. If it wasn't the enemy, why would they shoot us? They knew who I was but they didn't shoot. I followed the king to fight all over the east, west, south, north, and many times mixed with the Tho and Man people. I took a close look at the people on this mountain. These are Man people, not the enemy." The prince raised the flag high so they could see clearly. "I would like to negotiate with them." Hoi Van stopped. "Who do we rely on for what you do?" The old general laughed. "Between us and each other, there's nothing to worry about." The old general dismounted from his horse and walked up the mountain, his hand raised to block the crossbow arrows that were being shot all around him, his mouth constantly calling out loudly in Man language. Hoi Van ordered the flag to be raised very high, and told everyone to prepare to deal with all uncertainties. 600 guys nervously looked up at the mountain. The old general was still climbing and calling. The old general came before the leader. They talked to each other. Following the old general's pointing finger, the tall man looked down at the foot of the mountain, his head nodding, causing his wide-brimmed hat to flip up and down. Hoi Van put the bow on his shoulder and said, "It's not the enemy, it's almost a big mistake." The old general went first, the leader followed, both went down the mountain. Arriving in front of Hoi Van's horse, the leader spoke a series of Man languages. The old general said. He invited the prince to the mountain. The leader was a man in his 40s, big and muscular, with sharp eyes, a thin beard, blackened skin, and a face as hard as stone. "I wear an indigo shirt and grass shoes. Gestures are clumsy and slow." The heroic man called himself Nguyen the Lock, owner of Maluk Camp, of Langjiang religion. Hoi Van let his troops rest and eat, then followed the Lock up the mountain. It just got dark. Mist is foggy. The soldiers' camp was a large stone cave with bone-chilling cold air. Several plastic torches cast a dim light, making the atmosphere of the cave even more mysterious. There were people sitting and standing, all wearing indigo shirts and grass shoes. Everyone was muscular and sinewy, silent as stone. They looked at the newly arrived guests without saying a word of greeting. On the cliffs, bows and arrows and large, bright knives hang. Among the crowd of indigo-shirted people, there were 4 or 5 people who seemed alert and sharp. Looking at their clothes, Hoi Van guessed that they were Imperial soldiers. Seeing Hoi Van, they seemed half happy and half scared. Hoi Van asked, "What are these people like?" They turned pale. One person said, "Bam, did you have to obey the order of Duke Tiet to come here to rescue? Where is the enemy that needs rescue? Which army do you belong to and are here?" They trembled and did not speak. The man people still said nothing. The old general whispered in Hoi Van's ear. The camp owner said that the enemy was very big, wherever he went, the army would break down. Around here, the enemy has already closed. We have fallen into the middle of the enemy's siege. These soldiers lost their way and ran here, temporarily took refuge with the man people, and then would find their way back to meet the army. Kwok Tone got angry and shouted loudly. The newly arrived enemy ran away. What do you guys do? Living only harms people. He pulled out his sword and tried to slash the soldiers. The old general held Hoi Van's hand and said, "Please, Prince, calm down. Let's listen to the farmer's story first." Hoi Van's face was still gloomy. The Lock invited Hoi Van to sit on a high stone slab, while he himself sat on a low stone. The wind outside howled, shaking the mountains and forests. The torches in the cave were sometimes dim and sometimes bright, emitting smoke. The Lock babbled in kin language, his voice was rough, without reserve, as strong as a knife cutting a cutting board. According to the Lock, the situation is very confusing. The Nguyen army crossed the border and arrived at Lok Chau. The army stopped the enemy at Kiokap Mountain, but the enemy advanced to attack Kali Pass. The army could not resist and had to retreat. Thot Hon's great army was stationed throughout Langjiang. The Lock said. He sent troops to steal buffaloes and horses. It also steals grass. Hoi Van asked. When it comes, what will the Lock do? The Lock's slanted eyes widened, unusually intense. Without saying anything, the Lock grabbed a large knife and slashed hard at a rock, causing fire to flare up. The Lock looked at the broken stone and said, "When he came in, I slashed him like this." Hoi Van chuckled and patted the Lock's lumpy shoulder. The Lock who is loyal in the wilderness is truly a blessing for the country. I was looking for an enemy to cut open his intestines and exhume his liver. Luckily, I met a brave man from the land of Lam Tuyen. You know where the enemy is, let's go fight together. Since meeting Kwok Tone, the Lock has not smiled. It seems that the man people never smile. Seeing Hoi Van laugh loudly, the Lock just sat with his eyes closed, occasionally gently stroking his thin beard. At this point, the Lock nodded and said, "Having you here, I really like it. Are you tired from traveling?" I fed him rice and then went to sleep. Tomorrow, I will take you to find the enemy to fight. The Lock told his family to prepare food and wine for Hoi Van. Sitting and drinking wine with the young guest, the Lock said, "I saw your 6 words, I haven't typed them yet. But if you're an enemy, you can't escape me. I haven't shot the poison arrow yet, I haven't ordered the stone trap to turn on. On the mountainside, there are stone traps everywhere." Hoi Van thought that a person in this deep mountain and valley still knew how to take care of fighting the enemy, so why did the military officers run away? Isn't that so shameful? Hoi Van drank a bowl of man wine. People are hot. That night, lying in a cold stone cave with no curtain or mat, Hoi Van slept restlessly. The next morning, Hoi Van woke up. The Lock neatly dressed and followed Ho-I-Van out of the cave. Outside the cave, indigo-shirted soldiers busily set up more stone traps. They cheered and tried rolling extremely large rocks down to the foot of the mountain. The rolling rocks roared like thunder and the wind roared. The Lock pointed to the broken trees and said, "Is the enemy as strong as those trees?" Ho-I-Van looked at each trap, always praising the brave man of the green forest and red mountains. Suddenly seeing a few man-people sitting braiding a grass figure, Ho-I-Van asked the Lock, "What are you doing? You're a general without knowing anything. My army is small, so I have to be more of a grassman for them." Ho-I-Van passionately watched the grassman in the position of raising his bow and intending to shoot. After weaving the grass figure, some man-soldiers placed it behind a thick grove of trees. They pulled the strings and the grass figure moved like a real person. Ho-I-Van became even more excited and turned to tell the old general. "In the past, our country had Liang Trong, a god general with a height of 10 feet. He was sent to help the Qin dynasty suppress the Xiongnu rebellion. Whenever they saw him, the Huns lost their minds. When he passed away, the Qin dynasty mourned and ordered a statue made as large as a real person. The Hun army came again, and the Qin king ordered the statue to be carried. The enemy thought he was still alive and ran like a mouse. Now we should also braid a large figure like Saint Kem. The Yuan enemy will definitely burst into tears when they see it." The old general said, "What the prince said suits me very well. I know that the Nguyen invaders needed grass for their horses like they needed food. Maluk Field has a lot of grass, so they will come there no matter what. We lured them in there, using tactics to attack them. Definitely win big. We should do it like this." The old general whispered to Ho-I-Van and the Lock. Ho-I-Van nodded and laughed loudly. "That's right. That's right." Immediately, Marquis Ho-I-Van's soldiers and the Lock's soldiers went into the forest to cut wood and bamboo. They gathered together to weave a figure of a god general, taller than the granary, large enough for 2 people to hug. The god general's face was as black as a basin, his beard was bushy, his stuffed snail eyes were wide open, staring down at the field. The divine general held a crossbow as big as a bamboo boat, with an arrow as long as a spear. Standing in the field and looking up, I saw a murderous spirit, a strange and ferocious appearance. The Lock suddenly pointed to an ancient banyan tree in the field, its branches and leaves spreading out as wide as a large pond. The Lock told Ho-I-Van, "I'll discuss this with you. If there is a godly general, then there must be a godly name to be able to deceive the ridiculous enemy." Ho-I-Van was delighted and patted man's back hard. "I didn't expect that even the mountains and wilds also hide talented generals. The Lock is good. The Lock is very good." People climbed to the top of a towering banyan tree and punctured a branch so large that one person could not hug it. People thread through the hole a piece of wood carved into the shape of a giant arrow. 6 or 7 other ancient trees in the field were all pierced by magic arrows like that. 600 men and man-soldiers were fascinated, looking at the gods on the mountain and at the arrows piercing hundreds of years-old trees. Suddenly, a person ran up from the foot of the mountain. The Lock told Ho-I-Van, "My brother is Nguyen Lin, stationed outside the camp. There must be some business coming here." Nguyen Lin entered the cave. Lin looks exactly like the Lock, the only difference is that he has a smooth chin and no beard. Nguyen Lin says, "Throw it in there." The Lock asked, "How many guys?" 500, everyone rides a horse. A horse is a horse. If he comes in, he'll beat you, what's the point? Ho-I-Van rubbed his hands happily. They have come to give us their lives. Order everyone not to let a single enemy escape. Man's brave men and 600 noble men were divided into positions on the mountains. In the cave, only a few soldiers were left to take care of the stone traps and control the gods. Next to the gods and generals, a flag was erected with 6 words inscribed on it, destroying the division and reporting Huangin. It was past noon and afternoon. Clouds cover the trees on the mountain top. Hiding in the forest, Hoi Van looked at the enemy army falling into his position. Vast wilderness of people and horses. Blue shirt, red shirt, purple shirt, black shirt. They all wear animal skin boots and hats with striped fur like fox or civet fur. Very long spears bobbed along the horses' hooves. The quivers swayed on their shoulders, bristling with iron-capped arrows. They rushed forward, the rear horse's head hitting the front horse's butt. Hoi Van held his breath as he looked at the enemy soldiers, his body trembling. He gritted his teeth trying to regain composure. The mountain city echoed with the roar of horses neighing. The enemy army has entered the middle of the field. The enemy general rushed ahead. Nearing the Ma'luk mountain range, it suddenly stopped. The soldiers of Hoi Van and the Lok all held the hilts of their swords and spears tightly. Teams that are good at shooting try to pull the bowstring to flex their arms and aim the arrow to hit the target. The enemy general looked up halfway up Ma'luk mountain, where the general stood tall next to the great flag. The enemy soldiers sat quietly on their horses. The horses slowed down, they looked up, then looked at each other bewilderedly. The enemy general raised his whip and pointed and turned around as if giving an order to his soldiers. The enemy advanced slowly. Do they know that divine appearances are fake? Hoi Van asked himself, and his heart pounded until his chest burst. But the enemy army advanced timidly. The general stretched his bow towards the god general on the mountain, and his army also gathered arrows. Just then, among the enemy, there were screams of terror. Many enemy fingers pointed to the trunk of a tall banyan tree that had been pierced by a magic arrow. They panicked and pointed to other ancient trees that were also shot through. Many people shook their heads and stuck out their tongues. On the mountain, the divine general walked a few steps, the divine arrow mounted on the unusually large crossbow pointed straight at the enemy army. The large flag swelled as if on command, clearly displaying 6 haughty words. The sound of drums on the mountains rang out, shaking the whole sky. The whole field rumbled like a broken market. The general turned his horse and ran out, and the enemy army also drifted behind. Boom, boom, the whole high mountain seemed to collapse on the enemy. Rocks rolled down the mountain, crushing the heads of men and horses. The enemy soldiers fought to flee. Horses crashed into each other and fell down. Horses trampled on lying soldiers. The horse dragged the awkward guys who couldn't get their legs out of the stirrups. Hoi Van patted his thigh and shouted, "Dad is not happy. Let's attack our army." The horn sounded loudly for a while. The first group of enemy soldiers to run out fell under a fierce rain of arrows and crossbows. The survivors ran in, colliding with the army that was rushing back. People were thrown from their horses, and fell everywhere on the ground. Crying, silent calling. Crying sound like re. The enemy army was dark, only the sound of the mountain collapsing and the cheers of thousands of soldiers and horses could be heard. The indigo-shirted soldiers climbed as fast as apes and were already in front of the enemy, brandishing large knives to slash at the enemy like bananas. The enemy did not distinguish between heaven and earth, day and night, confused and did not know where to run. The enemy general led a group of soldiers to fight to the death and escape from the terrible Ma'luk field. They were running down an alley when they suddenly heard the loud sound of gongs and drums. On a high slope, an army blocked the road. A shrill scream. "Ignore the enemy, this is their dead end. Where else will they run?" The enemy general looked up the slope and was startled to see a flag with 6 words on it, just like the 6 words on the high mountain. It seemed like the god general had come down here again. The god general is now a young man, with a face as beautiful as jade, sitting on the back of a white horse, holding a long spear in his hand. Hoi Van pointed at the enemy general's face. Defeated general, at this point, do you still want to defy the might of heaven? Give up the teachings and surrender, then you will still have your life intact. Behind the young general, dust was rising, as if there were thousands of soldiers and horses. The enemy general panicked, jumped down from the saddle and knelt before Marquis Hoi Van's white horse. The flag embroidered with 6 words was faded in the darkness, but still rang loudly. Quoc Ton suddenly felt someone tugging at his shirt. Bend down and see the lock. He got off his horse, held his mountain friend's hand and said, only a few escaped, but that's good. Let them go home and tell each other the news of defeat. The lock said, today is so fun, I have to become brothers with you. Is that okay? Whoever is older is you. The lock is him. In the darkness, Quoc Ton caught a glimpse of the lock smiling. King Chu Tran Ik Tak, who advocated lending his way to the enemy, secretly left the capital, taking his whole family to join the enemy. Ik Tak escaped for a day before the court found out. The court guessed that Ik Tak ran to Langjiang to meet Thot Hon. Chu Tan Vong, Tran Quoc Ton's uncle, was ordered to chase the traitor. To stay out of the way and travel quickly, Vong only brought 500 basic troops. Along the way, Chu Tan Vong encountered groups of people running around carrying their children. The further north you go, the more desolate the landscape becomes, and the rarer you see the sounds of chickens crying and dogs barking. Arriving in an area in Langjiang, Chu Tan Vong heard that Ik Tak had just left. Vong then ordered the chiefs to block the roads to prevent Ik Tak from escaping, while Vong took shortcuts in the forest to chase the traitor. The road is both difficult and dangerous. Throughout Langjiang province, there are enemy troops stationed everywhere. Many chiefs withdrew to follow the army. But there were also people who surrendered to the enemy and led them to hunt down the court's generals. Chu Tan Vong felt that he could fall into the hands of the enemy at any moment. Dry food has almost run out and we don't know where to get food supplies. The more you chase, the darker Ik Tak's shadow becomes. Vong was very worried. While confused, Vong suddenly heard that at Maluk camp, a man named Nguyen the Lock rose up to fight the enemy. That man was helped by a very young general from somewhere. They advance and retreat as quickly as lightning, appear out of nowhere, and fight the enemy at unexpected times, so the enemy is terrified. Every time he goes to battle, the young man waves a flag with 6 words inscribed on it, destroying the Diemian praise Hoangin. Wherever he goes, he wins. The Lok language and the young general have a famous 6-letter flag throughout the Langjiang region. Thot Hon was unable to track down the young general's whereabouts. Hearing that news, Chu Tan Vong put his hand on his forehead and said to himself, our southern country still has many blessings to give birth to those unknown heroes. Chu Tan Vong then asked for directions to Maluk camp. Since winning the Battle of Maluk, the man soldiers and 600 heroic men were all excited. Hoi Van and the Lok led troops today to attack here, tomorrow to harass there. They often snipe the enemy troops, sometimes blocking them along the road, sometimes inviting the enemy into dangerous places to destroy them, sometimes setting up flags here to fight the enemy there. For a whole month, they did not leave the enemy alone for a single day. Thot Hon offered a reward to anyone who could capture or take the head of the Lok, and the young person with the 6-letter flag would be rewarded with 1 tael of gold and given the title 10,000 households. But unfortunately, the ghost army kept hiding in the forest, and when they emerged, several dozen or hundreds of Tran Nam Vong's troops were lost. One morning, Nguyen the Lok was sitting on the mountain soaking arrows in poison when he was informed that in a nearby forest there was a group of several dozen people, apparently from the capital. Not knowing where to go but bringing the whole group with them. Grandmother, children, Everyone seems suspicious. The lock said. Noble or cowardly? Dress like a commoner, but look like a noble person. The lock stood up suddenly. It's Ik-Tak. Why not catch it right away? The lock went down the mountain and led 10 soldiers to rush to that forest. Originally, the lock had been ordered to guard against Ik-Tak's escape, so he still sent people to find out information about the traitor. When the lock arrived at the forest, Ik-Tak's group had already gone. The lock stomped his feet, pulled his hair and cried out in pain. Immediately led the soldiers on their horses to follow the footsteps of the fugitives. They chased from morning to noon and then from noon to afternoon until they arrived at Kyoan. Looking far ahead, I saw the enemy's flags filling the sky. The lock was desperate. Many warriors discussed returning home. Suddenly they heard someone rustling in the forest. Listened to the voices of children and women. The lock was overjoyed and followed the sound of people running towards him. Hearing the noise, the others ran away. Chasing out the forest gate, the lock saw a group of men and horses running in the direction of the enemy camp. The lock shouted loudly. What are those people like? Stop and I'll ask. The group panicked, whipped their horses and ran away. No one dared to look back. The sound of women screaming, the sound of children crying. The lock and everyone rushed on their horses, ready to shoot. The lock called. Is that Chu Quoc Vong? There was no reply. The others were still running. The lock said loudly. If it's King Chu, stop, it's Lock. Lock was ordered to welcome the king and bring him to meet Tran Nam Vong. One of them turned back. That person had a long face, white skin, and a beautiful black beard, exactly the appearance of Tran Ik-Tak as clearly stated in the health certificate. Tran Ik-Tak, because it was him, ran and asked again. Who are you? The lock chuckled. Me? This is the lock. Return to the army or I will shoot you dead. Ik-Tak fell unconscious, hugged the horse's neck and ran away. It was dark. The lock shot an arrow, hitting Ik-Tak in the shoulder. Ik-Tak just kept running with his arrow. They all disappeared behind a mountain range. Just as the lock rushed forward, an arrow stabbed him in the side. The lock fell into a deep stream. By the time the warriors were able to defend the lock, the Ik-Tak group had already run away. The sky is dark as ink. Looking towards the enemy camp in the distance, I saw bright lights. The lock pulled out the short knife he wore, sighed and said, If you can't catch it, why live? Having finished speaking, he brought the knife to stab his neck. A soldier grabbed the knife. If you die, who will we live with? You have to go back to camp first, stay here near him, if he catches you, it will be miserable. In the dark of night, the brothers bandaged the lock's wound. They urged him 3 times and 7 times before the lock agreed to go home. It was just dawn when we passed the area of Kyoan. Suddenly I heard the sound of horse music. They hid in the woods and looked out. They cheered. A red flag with 6 golden letters emerged from the hill ahead. The two sides met each other and were delighted. Listening to the lock's account of his missed capture of Tran Ik-Tak, Hoi Van was stunned and spoke for a long time. I remember back in Bin Then, when I told the mandarins to let me fight, King Chu Quoc screamed and beheaded me. Now it is clear that he is a wolf-hearted man, and has been plotting to sell the country since that day. I regret that I didn't know and went with the lock. That person joining the enemy's side would be very harmful to the court. Suddenly I saw a man in an indigo shirt with a wide hat galloping on a horse and running towards me. If you look out, it's Nguyen Lin. Nguyen Lin breathed and said, Must go home now. The camp is gone. Everyone asked. Nguyen Lin said out of breath. Yesterday at noon, a great king led his soldiers and horses to the camp. He was ordered by the king to come up here to chase away Ik-Tak. Who is that great king? Hoi Van asked. I do not know. He said he wanted to meet Mr. Locke. As soon as he finished speaking, the enemy came and surrounded him on all sides. Since yesterday noon, the king has been fighting with the enemy, and many people and horses have died. The enemy will kill it. Hoi Van says. Arrogant enemy, if you want to die, let him die. Hoi Van discussed the plan to kill the enemy with the old general and the Locke, then headed to Maluk with everyone. Talking about Chu Tan Vong, he asked for a long time before finding Maluk camp, hoping to meet the heroic camp owner and the young general with the 6-letter flag. Arriving there, Vong met a man-soldier. Before we could finish the conversation, the Yuan army from all directions came roaring in. Vong divided his army into divisions and fought against the enemy from morning until evening. Vong was exhausted, the base army only had about 400 people left. Near dawn, Vong ran to a hill road. Vong told the soldiers, I obeyed the royal court's order to chase King Chu Quoc, but unfortunately met the enemy halfway. You must make every effort to fight the enemy to escape the siege so you can capture Iktak. I decide to fight to the death with you. The enemy army loudly chased after them. They all rode horses as fast as flying. Most of Chu Tan Vong's troops were on foot and were exhausted, so many fell behind. Some ran away, some were killed, trampled by enemy horses. Chu Tan Vong fought and withdrew at the same time. Looking at our army, there were only 200 people left. Behind him, the enemy army was crowded, darkening the whole road and the hills on both sides. The horrifying screams were like the sounds of demons in the underworld. Chu Tan Vong's horse was hit by several arrows. The enemy is near. Vong patted his precious horse. I'm here for the country, so you should try to run away from this danger for me. It seemed that the horse understood his master's passionate words, so he reared up like the wind. After running a long distance, the animal slowed down. It slowly collapsed. The enemy almost caught up. Several loyal generals gathered to protect Chu Tan Vong. Vong firmly held the end of the sword in his hand and said, I swear to live and die by this sword. Determined not to let the wolves violate the golden body. The generals had just helped Chu Tan Vong up a hill when the enemy troops came and surrounded the foot of the hill. The siege tightened, overlapping each other. Swords and spears are as thick as mortar wedges. Many spears carried the heads of Chu Tan Vong's soldiers, blood streaming down the spear shafts. Chu Tan Vong and the rest of his army fought and retreated until they reached the hill. Vong held the sword firmly and slashed at the enemy repeatedly. The king's strength was exhausted, his body was injured and sore, his battle robe was soaked with blood and sweat. The sword that has been slaying the enemy since yesterday has become dull. Vong's arms were weak. Several confidants fell at the feet of the king. Behind the high hill beside the road, cheers suddenly arose. Vong swung his sword to push away the spiked spears and raised his eyes to look at the hill on that side. Vong saw a mess of people and horses. Vong said to the only remaining general, the enemy is coming again, our destiny is over. But the general shouted loudly, Your Majesty, it's easy not to be an enemy. Before the general could finish his sentence, the army on the hill in front of him rushed down the road like a waterfall and hit the back of the enemy group surrounding Chu Tan Vong's hill, splitting the enemy army in half, as if fighting. Snake in the middle. The enemy let out barbaric cries. They broke into pieces like falling walls. The siege was closing tightly on the hill, instantly disappearing like smoke. Chu Tan Vong's soldiers cheered. Rescuers have arrived. And forgetting all their fatigue, they attacked down from the hills. The general of Chu Tan Vong said, The enemy has withdrawn. Who came to save me? Vong calmly looked down at the foot of the hill and saw the enemy soldiers running around like chickens, swords, spears, bows and arrows thrown haphazardly. The army that came to the rescue took control of the battlefield. Chu Tan Vong's health returned. Vong swung his sword down and asked the general, "Was it a dream?" As soon as Vong finished speaking, he suddenly saw fluttering a flag with 6 golden words, "Pha Quang Dik Press Hoang In." The flag waved high and mighty. Chu Tan Vong looked at the strange flag, rubbed his eyes, then looked again to see if it was a mistake. Vong wondered, is this what the general has on a 6-letter flag? Sure enough, under the flag, there was a young general, wearing a red robe and riding a white horse. The young general raised his voice and commanded his soldiers to kill the enemy. Vong was startled, hearing the familiar voice. Vong looked again at the young general riding his horse, with a 6-letter flag flying in front of him. Vong let out a cry of surprise. "Why do you look exactly like my nephew?" Vong's confidant also said. "Who is like Marquis Hoi Van?" "No way." Chu Tan Vong squinted his eyes at the young general and exclaimed, "That's right, my nephew." Chu Tan Vong ran after the flag embroidered with 6 words. While running, a hand held me back. "Here it is, Your Majesty." "Here it is." That was Nguyen Lin, the man-soldier that Vong met yesterday afternoon. At the same time, there was a respectful greeting. "Dear King. When Your Majesty will come, we do not know." Vong looked out and saw that he was an old general. Vong was delighted. "Are you here too?" "That's my nephew." The 6-letter flag flew again. The young general's white horse galloped over the scattered corpses of the enemy. In just a blink of an eye, the young general reached the foot of the hill and stopped his horse in front of Chu Tan Vong. 2 lines of tears flowed down his uncle's bruised cheeks. Hoi Van cried out, a cry of joy. "Dear uncle! Since when did you come here?" He jumped off his horse and knelt before Chu Tan Vong. "I didn't know you were coming, I came late to say goodbye, please forgive me." "That's right, my nephew. I'm still a baby with a milky face, but now I'm proud and proud." It was still the voice of a boy who had just broken his voice but was unexpectedly strong. Vong smiled but tears kept flowing. Vong lifted him up and said, "The afterbirth is formidable. My nephew is young but heroic." Hoi Van pointed to the lock, who also ran over. "This is my sworn brother. I am what I am today thanks to this mountain hero." Vong looked first at Hoi Van, then at the man people, then at the heroic men Vo Nin who came to greet him. At Vong's feet, enemy corpses lay piled up, blood flowing like a stream from the hill to the road. Vong looked up at the 6-word flag and muttered, "Destroy the enemy's strength, report the king's grace." Vong pulled the flag down to see clearly. Vong nodded silently. A heroic man led a horse that had been stolen from the enemy, and brought it before Chu Tan Vong. Hoi Van invited him to get on the horse and return to Maluk. Vong said, "I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it." Thanks to the man medicine of the Lock brothers, Chu Tan Vong's wounds healed in no time. At that time, Thuong Quoc Duc Tiet Hung Dao Vong was stationed in Van Keep. The princes and military officers of all religions have returned to join the monks there. Chu Tan Vong was also summoned to Van Keep. Vong discussed with Quoc Tone, "You have accomplished many achievements, but the court doesn't know yet. You should go back and present yourself to Tiet and obey the royal orders." Hoi Van says, "Because I was angry at the enemy, I sewed a military flag, hoping to follow the military to save the people and the country. I just think that I came here, even though it's only been over a month, but the Lock brothers are closer to me than blood. They are simple people, but they know how to be loyal. People like Ik Tak, grateful to the rain and rain, but when the country changes, they turn themselves into dogs for the enemy, are not worthy of carrying food and shoes for the Lock brothers. It was thanks to the Lock that I learned to fight the enemy. I again made a brotherhood with the Lock, promised to stay here together, and decided to live comfortably with the enemy." "Why did you break up with the Lock?" Chu Tan Vong said. "I think so too. But if you think one, you have to think two. Now the enemy is big, and if we want to defeat it, the military must be brought together in one group, so that it is easier for Tiet to control it. Moderating to avoid the enemy's initial morale, withdrawing all troops to wait for the opportunity to counterattack, that is such a great and deep plan. So sooner or later, we will have to return to Van Keep. The Locke brothers are loyal people. He will submit a petition asking the court to reward them so they can be excited to fight the enemy. My love for the Locke brothers is so deep. But we have to put aside our personal feelings and take care of the big picture. What do you think? Chu Tan Vong asked several times, but Hoi Van still sat silently without speaking. Finally, Hoi Van went to find the Locke brothers. How can I end Hoi Van's sadness at having to say goodbye to the brave soldiers of Maluk? King Chu Tan led the local army out of the grasslands, but Hoi Van and 600 brave men were still struggling on the mountain. Just one afternoon when they passed here, crossbows from the mountain shot down like rain. Then there were the days of standing side by side, sharing sweets, making stone traps together, cutting wood and bamboo together to build a giant god general. Then, the jubilant days of victory made the enemy army extremely frightened. They looked up at the dark but familiar cave. They looked up at the large rocks rolling down from the mountains, scattered across the fields still stained with enemy blood. They looked at the ancient banyan tree, at the top of which there was still a hole in the god's name. How can I forget those happy days? They held the hands of brave men in indigo shirts. Some received handfuls of corn, some tubers of cassava, some a tube of honey, some a packet of ointment. The heroic man gave back his sword, the brave man gave back his knife, one gave him a bow, the other gave him a crossbow. Hoi Van held the horse's reins in his hand and walked beside the Locke and Nguyen Lin. Hoi Van did not dare to look at the faces of the two Man brothers, because those sinewy, stone-like faces, seemingly always stubborn, were now filled with tears. Nguyen the Locke could not speak. His scarred hand pointed to the saddle of Hoi Van's horse, signaling his young friend to ride. Hoi Van pursed his lips. Innocence was clearly visible on his face, which was tinged with wind and frost. Hoi Van says, "When will I see the Locke again?" The man grumbled. "When you return to the capital, you'll be happy down there. You won't remember the Locke and won't come here again." "I remember, but you don't remember. The Locke is Tone's sworn brother. Maluk is also Tone's hometown. How can I forget? Mr. The Locke, Tone doesn't want to go home either. You're still young, you'll forget it right away. If you go back there, there are no mountains or forests. I'm very worried, I won't be happy. If you can't fight down there, then come up here and stay with me." Hoi Van patted the Locke's rock-hard back and said, Up, but this the Locke. If the enemy fights hard, will they still be here?" The Locke looked at Hoi Van, his quiet, simple eyes suddenly lit up. "I'm here. Where are you going?" "You ask? Where do deer go? The enemy fought below, then I went up the mountainside. It hits the side and I reach the top. Up high then down again. It chases this mountain, I go to that mountain. Does it belong to the mountains and forests like the Locke?" The Locke pointed to Hoi Van's saddle, told him to climb on and said, "If you can't stay anymore, go away. Stand and do something that will make me remember forever. You tell me to come up, if you don't come up I'll be angry, I won't look at your face." The Locke brothers helped Hoi Van and the old general onto their horses. Hoi Van walked a few steps, turned around and saw the Locke brothers trudging up the mountain. A strip of white clouds stretched across. Hoi Van's heart sobbed, following the horses' hooves on the bumpy, winding mountain road. The armies of all religions have returned to join the monks in Van Keep. The land of martial arts has the position of dragons rolling in and tigers flanking them. On Luke Dojiang Wharf, warships from all directions came and parked closely. Marquis Hoai van Tran Quoc Toen's camp was built on a hilltop. The flag of Pha Quang Dik Bao Hoang and rose high, waving with hundreds of flags of other princes. Hoai van is very proud. Hoai van was proud that although his army was only 600 and had just appeared, the princes with tens of thousands of elite soldiers under their command did not look down on him. The happiest thing for Hoai van was to be praised by Hung Dao Vong. When Hoai van offered the weapons and clothes plundered from the Nguyen invaders, Tiet Truc was very happy and said, "Very good. These things are going to work really well." And Hung Dao Vong ordered it to be stored carefully in storage until it was needed. But the country is increasingly in danger. After taking over Langjiang, Thot Hon's army swept down to Kai Lang, past the dangerous Devil's Gate, and in an instant were stationed throughout the Vo Ninh region. I don't know where my old mother is now. Hoai van's heart was as hot as fire. And 600 noble men, hearing the news of their homeland being destroyed, all stood still. The entire Vo Ninh region was destroyed by the enemy. Adults were dismembered and gutted, children were thrown into cauldrons of oil, and skewered on the tip of spears. Alas! 600 soldiers just hoped to have wings to fly back to their homeland to save everyone from the fire. One evening, they sat in the camp, listening to Hoai van Red Quoc Kong Tiet's words. Their hearts are like a fire burning with more fuel. They devoured every sentence, every word. Every word is imprinted in my mind, engraved in my bones. They pursed their lips and held their hands tightly. The words are sometimes angry, sometimes passionate, sometimes admonishing, sometimes instructive, sometimes eloquent and assertive, sometimes screaming like waves and wind. You and I were born in tumultuous times and grew up in days of suffering. Now I see enemy envoys walking loudly in the streets, curling their tongues and scolding the court, using their dog and goat body to disrespect the Prime Minister, relying on Kublai Khan to demand jade and silk. Taking advantage of Tran Nam Vong's position to force them to surrender. Silver gold. Treasures are limited, greed is limitless. It's no different than throwing meat to a hungry tiger. How can you escape future misfortune? Nowadays, I forget to eat during the day, forget to sleep at night, my eyes are filled with tears, my intestines hurt like hell, I'm always angry that I can't even peel them off. Why? Because the Nguyen enemy is our mortal enemy. If you keep neglecting to think about washing your country's shame and not training your soldiers, thus turning your spear to surrender and refusing to die, then what face will you have left to stand in this circle of heaven and earth protecting you? Okay? The words are always ringing in their ears, making them excited and excited. It was late at night, they still couldn't sleep. They toss and turn all the time. Then a man stood up and sharpened his sword. Others also stood up, passionately practicing. Then some dance with swords and others with sticks. Hoai van's camp was noisy and bustling. It seemed like the soldiers were preparing to go to war. Hoai van and the old general sat and studied the book The Military Strategy of Hung Dao Vong, which they received at the same time as the paper. 3 times, the servants filled the lamp dish with oil. 3 times the oil pan was empty. But the two still diligently read the golden words in the new war book. They were fascinated because they discovered so many new things in the use of soldiers. The drum has struck the second watch. As morning approached, the sounds of sword sharpening and spear dancing echoed throughout the barracks. Listen to the brothers whispering and rereading the words in the hitch. ... I forget to eat during the day, forget to sleep at night. Why? Because the Yuan invaders and we are enemies that cannot wait for heaven's end. What face is left to stand in this circle of heaven protecting the earth? Everyone must have health like Bang Mong and Hao Nagi. Those painful words penetrated deeper into Hoai van's heart. Several times, Quoc Toen urged his brothers to go to sleep to learn new military techniques tomorrow, but the sound of sharpening swords kept getting louder and louder. The murmuring sound was sometimes low and sometimes high. Hoi Van and the old general closed their books and went down to their brother's camp. Hoi Van was surprised to see that everywhere was unusually busy. Here we practice sword fighting, there we practice wrestling, in another we practice stabbing and cutting. This group practices indoors. The other group practiced outdoors regardless of the drizzle and wind. Hoi Van asked why he didn't go to sleep. They answered that because they were angry at the enemy, their limbs were itchy and they couldn't sit still. In a corner of the camp, under the dim light of a peanut oil lamp, there was a group of naked brothers. Hoi Van was surprised and walked over. Many people outside also ran in and took off their clothes. Hoi Van thought they were about to wrestle. But when you get close, it's not. People divided into many groups. In each group of 10 people, one person rubbed his indigo and wrote words on the outstretched arms, and another person held a small, needle-like awl and pricked it firmly into the arm where the words were written. The writer, the person who teased, and the person being teased all became so intoxicated that they forgot all about life. Hoi Van stood dumbfounded, watching the arms of blood pouring out, mixed with indigo and ink. A guy who had just finished being lit, gritted his teeth and said, "I swear I will never fight against that enemy." Hoi Van looked closely at the gray-red arm. Vertical and horizontal lines clearly appear, 1 or 2 words SAT that. Hoi Van's eyes lit up. Hoi Van grabbed that bloody arm. The soldier scowled fiercely and shouted at him, "Put off your clothes. This hatred must be engraved into the bones and marrow. Why don't you dare to like these 2 words if you're afraid of the enemy?" After speaking, he recognized Hoi Van. Many awls stopped burning, the tips of the awls turned red as if on fire. The blood in Hoi Van's body was racing, his entire body was achingly stimulated. Hoi Van asked, "Who told you this?" One person said. Seeing that other armies had brothers who liked the words, "sat that," in their hands, we also did the same. Like new people and never forget their mortal enemies. Rivers can dry up, rocks can wear away, these 2 words cannot be erased. Life is on the shoulders, death is gone with the bones, entering the soul and flying to kill the enemy. Who wrote these 2 words sat that for you? Those who draw and write will write. Prince, can you see it? Good. Your loyalty must reach to heaven. Hoi Van looked at his young friends and shed tears. Everyone was excited as if they were about to rush into the enemy. Their arms were embossed with the word sat that, raised up as if to support young water. Hoi Van's eyes flashed, seeing the terrible words sat that, sat that, sat that everywhere. Hoi Van took off his robe, revealing half of his white body, held out his arm and said, "Like the words sat that on my arm." People applied indigo and wrote words on Hoi Van's arm. He pursed his lips, eyes half closed. The sharp, cold tip of the awl stabbed into the skin with sharp pain, and fresh blood oozed out. He didn't feel pain, he just felt passionate and excited as if he were on a battlefield. Hoi Van says, "I like to dig deep, so that those 2 words will never be blurred." In other groups, people are also putting the word sat that on each other's arms. Throughout the camp, more and more brothers poured in. They took off their shirts and competed with each other to extend their arms and asked to be liked first. The 2 words sat that appeared on Hoi Van's blood-red arm, like 2 blooming flowers greeting the daylight that had come without knowing it. All the generals in Van Keep liked to put the word sat that on their arms. Generals and soldiers in other places also followed that example. But Thoth Hon's army was so large that it overflowed like water bursting its banks. They attacked Van Keep. Hung Dao Vong had to leave Van Keep. They attacked Thang Long, placed guns on the banks of the Kai River and destroyed the capital and barracks. Hung Dao Vong discussed with the princes and generals. The enemy is strong, winter is a profitable season for them to advance. We should avoid the initial morale of the enemy, temporarily abandon the capital, and withdraw our troops to Honai. Wait until summer, when the enemy army is tired and can't stand the water and soil. We will attack with spears, and we will definitely drive the enemy out of the country in just one battle. Hung Dao Vong then left Thang Long and brought the king to Tanhua. The enemy's second army, led by Toa Du, a general with invincible health, traveled by road to attack Champa, then from Champa to attack Nguyen. Lieutenant General Chu Min Vong Tran Quang Kai was ordered to guard Nguyen. But Nguyen citadel was leveled by Toa Du. King Chu Min had to retreat to guard the dangerous mountainous areas to block Toa Du's army. The two pincers of Thot Hon in the north and Toa Du in the south clamped down on the remaining land of Tanhua. There are enemy soldiers everywhere in the south. The country is as dangerous as a husband's egg. The cold winter has passed, and rice flowers have bloomed red on the riverbanks. Then the grass became green again. The lychees are ripe and the howling birds are calling for summer. The night was pouring rain. Bright sunny day. The soldiers, buried forever in Tanhua, were all impatient. They count the days, looking forward to summer soon. Summer has come, but Hung Dao Vong's tiger tent is still as quiet as paper. Many times, Marquis Hoi Van asked Hung Dao Vong to lead his own army to attack. Even if he died, he was willing. Hung Dao Vong says, "To fight the enemy, you must know how to wait for the opportunity. When the opportunity comes, it's like a sail in the wind, the boat sails like it's flying. The time is coming, you have to practice. A moment is 1,000 gold, it should not be wasted." Hoi Van withdrew, still feeling sad, so he went to see Chu Van Vong Tran Nyat Duat, a person that Hoi Van loved very much and was very close to. Last year, Chu Van Vong went to suppress Trin Giok Mat, a rebellious man chief in Dajiang. Hearing the news of Chu Van Vong's arrival, Mat sent a messenger, challenging Vong if he was good enough to go to his camp alone. Mat would ask to submit to the court. The generals and soldiers were afraid that Mat was a deceitful person and advised Vong not to go. But Vong definitely accepted the chief's challenge. Vong only brought along a small boy carrying a casket. As for Vong, he did not wear armor, did not hold a weapon in his hand, and leisurely entered Trin Giok Mat's camp like a monk. Mat had soldiers waiting in ambush. Whenever he saw Vong carrying troops, he would attack. But when he saw Vong just waving a fan as he entered, Mat was very impressed. Mat dressed in civilian clothes to welcome King Chu Van, invited him back to camp and held a big party for the king. Vong was fluent in Turkish and Mandarin languages, and told Mat the pros and cons, advising him not to cause trouble and make hundreds of families miserable. Mat followed Vong's words. The whole stretch of Dajiang from there is calm and peaceful. When Hoi Van arrived at Chu Van Vong's palace, he saw Vong sitting in the garden playing chess with Tru Trung. Tru was a good general of the Song dynasty, refused to be a slave of the Yuan dynasty, went to live in the south and is currently a guest of King Chu Van. Hearing Hoi Van say all his feelings, Chu Van Vong smiled and said, "I know what Tiet means. The time to chase the enemy is not far away. You should nurture your anger until it grows strong, train your will to endure, and wait for the day when you will achieve success. Are you good at practicing naval warfare?" Hoi Van returned, still unhappy. He regretted the days in Maluk. It was truly heaven and earth, filled with joy and sorrow. Seeing that Hoi Van had poor appetite and sleep, the old general asked, "Why has the prince been so sad lately?" Hoi Van says, "The enemy has taken over most of the country, the danger of having no place left is clear. Yet day after day, I keep languishing here, how can I be happy?" The Duke said that by summer we will wipe out all the enemy troops. Now it's summer. The prince should be happy, right? I've been waiting forever, I can't stand it anymore. I want to withdraw 600 of my own troops to Langjiang and the Lok, to fight the enemy together like before. If we stay here forever, we will die. Last night, I dreamed that I was lying in Maluk cave. The Lok brothers saw me and were extremely happy. I must return to Maluk, to keep my promise to the Lok. A gentleman cannot be wrong. At this time, arbitrarily withdrawing private troops is a big crime. The prince should not think like that. Dangerous. If every general thinks like a prince, the army will be destroyed. Prince, you should not be confused, your mind must always be directed towards moderation. Abstinence is a master of economic power and strategy like a god. 30 years ago, at the age of 18, Tiet Truc demonstrated his strategic talent, helping Tai Tong defeat the Goluang invaders. That is a great general whose loyalty is as bright as the moon and stars. Is he the one who sits with his arms crossed and lets the country melt away? The prince should not be impatient or sad, lest he will reduce the morale of the soldiers. From then on, Kwok Tone felt a little reassured and enthusiastically studied military books, practiced fighting on land and water, waiting for the day to avenge his revenge. One day, when the weather was as hot as boiling, Hoi Van was suddenly summoned to the tiger tent. When we arrived, we saw that the princes and generals had gathered, standing on both sides of the tiger tent, in order from top to bottom. Former Lieutenant General Chu Min Vong Tran Quang Kai sent people to run day and night from Nguyen to report that Toa Du was blocked and attacked in Nguyen, had to withdraw to the tank and drag the warship north, to join Thot Hon's army. Hung Dao Vong discussed with the princes and generals. Toa Du crossed the sea to attack Champa, then used the route to attack Nguyen, thinking that he would soon pacify Hon and then swallow I. But that plan failed. That person had to leave Nguyen and go. So the journey was long, the soldiers were tired, and the summer was hot. They were not used to water and soil, so they were bound to get sick. That is the enemy's losing chance. Now I will bring my refreshed army to attack the tired enemy, destroying its morale in one battle, that is my victory. Everyone praised the right advice of moderation. Sitting on the tiger tent, Hung Dao Vong looked down at the princes and generals and asked. This first match must be won. Who will take our place and lead the army to attack Toa Du? Before Hung Dao Vong finished speaking, a person in the front row of princes stepped out, clasped his hands in front of him, and spoke boldly. Even though I'm incompetent, I still want to fight Toa Du. Lieutenant General Chu Min Vong stopped Toa Du in Nguyen, making a great contribution to the court. I have enjoyed many blessings and have not had a chance to repay them. This time, Tet believes in me, I am determined to destroy the enemy. Everyone could see that the person was Chu Van Vong Tran Nyat Duat, the king's uncle, who always had a leisurely and elegant look. Hung Dao Vong happily said. If King Chu Van leaves, I can sit at home and wait for good news. Having finished speaking, Hung Dao Vong pulled out a command flag, stood up from the tiger's tent, walked down and handed it to Chu Van Vong and said. If Toa Du can combine with Thot Hon, forming a steep position, it will be very difficult to fight. When Chu Van Vong took this step, he had to both destroy Toa Du's prestige and prevent Thot Hon and Toa Du from being able to contact each other. The former is difficult, the latter is even more difficult. Chu Van Vong must be very careful. Chu Van Vong received the command flag and said, Please obey the Duke's orders. I can't fulfill those two tasks, so in case of a big event, I would like to submit my head under your command. Chu Van Vong immediately wrote a letter of commitment to condemn the letter, still looking calm, his face unchanged. After that, Vong held the flag and ordered him to return to his original place. At the end of the line of servants, Hoi Van quickly stepped out, clasped his hands in front of him, looked up at the majestic tiger tent and said loudly, I asked Tiet to let me follow King Chu Van to attack Toa Du. Hung Dao Vong seemed to pay no attention to Hoi Van. Hung Dao says, Toa Du was a general of the Yuan dynasty, had the strength of a concubine, and fought the east to defeat the west, winning wherever he went. Currently, we only have Nguyen Coi and Pham Ngu Lao who can oppose Toa Du. Pham Ngu Lao was still in Nagi and helping the general. At home, there is General Nguyen Coi. Where is General Nguyen Coi? From the row of generals, Nguyen Coi let out a loud cry and walked out. He was a square-faced, broad-bodied man, about 40 years old, as sturdy as a pillar supporting a communal house. Nguyen Coi said, I obey the general's orders. Unable to defeat Toa Du, I decided not to return to see the Duke. Hung Dao Vong nodded and told Nguyen Coi to return to his seat. Hoi Van still looked up at the tiger's tent, his face red with anger. Hoi Van knelt down and said as if screaming, I followed the army into this place, day and night. I only wanted to fight the enemy, to repay the king's favor and repay the country's debt. Now the army is about to fight a big battle. Why does Tiet Truc appoint other generals and not believe in you? Hung Dao Vong says, Hoi Van is a little hero. I want to keep you for the next battle. Please let me go fight this battle. I always ask to go to every match, let alone the first match. Hoi Van raised his left hand and slapped hard on his right arm, liking the word sat that. The young man's face gradually turned pale, his words shook. I like the words sat that in my hand, not to move back. Who's afraid of Toa Du? I'm not afraid of it. 1 Toa Du, not 10 Toa Du, I still despise. Please let me follow your uncle. I will join General Nguyen Coi in fighting until Toa Du's armor is gone. I would also like to make a commitment letter. If I can't fight Toa Du, I'll submit my head to your command. Hung Dao Vong ordered Hoi Van to stand up and say, I just want to test your heart. I will let you follow your uncle. I wait for your good news. Hoi Van jumped up and cheered, forgetting that he was standing in front of a majestic tiger tent. After privately discussing the advance plan with Chu Van Vong, Hung Dao Vong personally saw the 3 people out of the palace gate before returning. Hung Dao Vong stroked his silver-spotted beard, smiled and said to everyone, Chu Van Vong's intelligence, General Nguyen Coi's health, Hoi Van Marquise's vigor, this battle will definitely win big. Hung Dao Vong stepped onto the tiger tent to discuss military affairs. Duke said, summon the general in Nagi to make arrangements to attack Thot Hon and take back the capital. Tran Nyat Duat and Tran Quoc Ton sat in a light boat, surfing on the turbid silver waves, going to review the final arrangement of the warships. The moonlight on the weekend shines brighter and brighter on the vast water surface of Ham Tu estuary. Chu Van Vong folded the paper fan he was holding, pointed to a deep whirlpool, and said to Hoi Van, tomorrow, Toa Du's boat will be destroyed here. We must work hard for a day, and enjoy happiness forever. Chu Van looked at the moon and water, smiled and said, it's truly a country mandarin. It seems like my uncle and I rowed a cinnamon boat to watch the moon to nourish our character. Who would have thought that tonight, our uncle and nephew were waiting for the enemy? Nyat Duat waved his fan, passionately admiring the mysterious and magical scenery. Could this fortune be left in the hands of someone else? Vong shook his thighs and quietly read a poem by Li Bok. Hoi Van's heart fluttered. He was excited. He is about to fight the first big battle of his life. Even happier, he was appointed by King Chu Van as a vanguard general. Tomorrow, Hoi Van will lead a group of boats downstream. You will be the one to confront the most talented general of the Yuan dynasty, and must lead Toa Du to this Ham Tu gate so that all 4 sides of our warships will pour out to attack. He looked at his royal uncle, dressed neatly and elegantly like a scholar. Hoi Van secretly admired the general, but he never felt confused or impatient. Hoi Van politely said. You're still young, being able to follow your royal uncle, it's really lucky for you. Chu Van Vong picked up the fan and lightly tapped it on the side of the boat. One hand raised to stroke his beard that the wind had messed up, Vong slowly said. The weapons and clothes of the enemy I captured in Langjiang, just as the Duke said the other day, are now fully operational. Didn't you help in that plot to destroy Toadu? The boat turns into a small river branch on the right. A row of warships docked close to the shore, hidden under dark bushes. Standing on the bow of a warship, Tru Trung, a guest of King Chu Van, was as tall as a bronze statue, dressed in velvet Song dynasty clothes. Tru Trung bowed to King Chu Van and said, "We Song people have sworn to fight to the death. Thanks to the king, we are about to wash away the sorrow of losing our country. We wore armor and couldn't perform the ceremony. Please excuse us." In the warships, Song dynasty soldiers following Tru Trung were busy preparing. They all wore Song dynasty military clothes. Many people wore Yuan army clothes. The two uniforms seemed similar, colorful like bird feathers or wild animal fur. Chu Van Vong went to take a look, whispering instructions to Tru Trung, then returned with Hoi Van. The boat gently sailed downstream, then turned into a river branch on the left. A row of warships docked close to the shore, hidden under dense bushes. Standing on the bow of a warship, General Nguyen Koi stood tall like a citadel, bowed to the king and said, "We all rubbed our hands and hoped to soon fight Toadu. We vowed not to let Toadu pass this stretch of river and return to the sea." Chu Van Vong went to take a look, then returned with Hoi Van. The boat gently drifted downstream. Vong looked at the river section where Hoi Van would arrange to wait for Toadu and lead him to Ham Tu Gate. Chu Van Vong said, "My work is heavy. You should make an effort. I'm determined not to miss the plan. I let the boat crew practice many times on this part of the river, and now they are quite proficient." Chu Van Vong nodded, discussed more with Hoi Van about tomorrow's work, then said, "You should go take a shower and get clean so you can command clearly tomorrow." I also went home to take a shower and rest for a while. Chu Van Vong returned to the place where his company of soldiers gathered above Ham Tu Gate. All around quiet. The summer moon has gradually faded. The sparse stars have all lost their connection. All I see is the vast sky and water, and the silver-headed waves crashing loudly, moving in the dim blue darkness. Marshal Toadu crossed O, Li, Hon, and I continents. Warships as numerous as bamboo leaves entered the mouth of Thien Trong Lake. Flags are raised, drums are playing, the appearance is truly majestic. But inside, from generals to soldiers, everyone is tired. The weather was hot again, the Blue Mountain miasma was rising, and the number of sick and dead people in Toadu's army was increasing day by day. Along the way, the food stolen in Champa gradually ran out. Arriving at Thien Trong, Toadu had to send soldiers to land in the villages and rob rice, cattle, and chickens. But people on the coast and on both sides of the river have stayed far away. Quan Nguyen could not plunder, the situation became even more miserable. Toadu felt it was necessary to quickly go to Thang Long to join forces with Thod Hon. So he sent patrols to explore the waterway. The patrol returned and reported, the villages on both sides were deserted, without a single soul. Toadu happily told the generals, "My king and I of the Tran dynasty have already run like a duck into Tanhua. Hearing our reputation has already made us lose confidence. Who else dares to show their head and block our way?" Toadu's warships pulled into the river from the mouth of the lake, one after another, several miles long, spreading out to fill the entire river. The masts were as black as the jungle. The sails darkened the water. At night, the lights are as bright as the streets and wards. During the day, flags were fanned in the sky and people from several miles away could see it. Gongs and drums rumble loudly like thunder and lightning in the rain. The fleet of warships sailed up the big river, going deep into the interior, amid a scene of dead silence. On both sides of the river, there are empty villages and dry grass fields. That morning, the warships arrived at a wide river. Toa-do asked a general, "Where is this?" That guy said, "This is about to reach Ham Tu Quan." "How long is it from here to Thang Long?" "Marshal, if we go this fast and travel day and night, at most we will arrive the next morning." Toa-do was very happy and ordered him to hurry and stop at Thang Long. The fleet of warships roared upstream, their sails filled the river, and the river water stagnated. Suddenly an explosion rang out, shaking the whole area. Flocks of birds on the banyan trees and rice plants, flocks of storks in the muddy fields flew chaotically into the sky. The Toa-do army was still bewildered, when a second explosion rang out, then a third explosion. Toa-do quickly climbed up the gazebo and looked ahead. From upstream, a group of small boats rushed down, as fast as an arrow. Before Toa-do could order the generals to fight, the other group of boats arrived. On the bow of the leading boat, there was flying a flag embroidered with 6 golden words, Pha Quang Dik Bao Hoang In. Standing behind the flag is a general in a bright red robe. He is a young general. Standing next to the child was a hungry old man. The entire fleet of boats consisted of only 40 or 50 ships, lined up on the river surface, intending to block the group of warships that were bravely advancing against the fierce waves. The young general standing behind the 6-letter flag shouted loudly, "I've been waiting for you guys here for a long time." Before the Nguyen army had time to form a battle formation, a series of arrows rushed towards them. Some hugged their stomachs, some held their faces, some jumped into the water. Toa-do's vanguard general waved his sword and called for troops to join the fight. While they were still confused, Hoi Van's boat came close, a sharp knife was thrown, and it plunged into the enemy general's chest. It fell like an uprooted tree, its head hit the side of the boat, and it died before it could yawn. The first row of warships retreated. There were screams and chants, mixed with the groans of Nguyen soldiers suffering from malaria. Hoi Van shouted loudly, "I don't want to kill you nameless people. Call Toa-do out here so I can question him." Toa-do suddenly became angry and shouted loudly, "You little brats, a few broken boats, Tran Dynasty generals, don't you know how humiliating you are and come out here to buy death?" Toa-do's warship did not sway and sway against the waves as it advanced. The brocade sail is like a big flag, long like a banner, and painted with strange shapes like charms. Toa-do stood in the middle of the boat's bow, on both sides were a group of rearguard generals, their swords flashing. Everyone wore fur coats and felt hats, and they looked feverish. They were panting, their foreheads sweating. Hoi Van thought to himself, "The sun will rise in a moment, you will still die, I told you in advance." Hoi Van ordered the soldiers, "That's Toa-do. Shoot it a preemptive round." 600 brave men roared loudly. Hundreds of arrows flew, pointing straight at Toa-do. The guard generals raised their wood to block it, and the arrow fell into the water. Toa-do stood tall on the bow of the boat. Toa-do's face was as big as a cutting board, his skin as red as baked bricks. Cheekbones are high, protruding at the same level as the ears. The eyes are long and sharp like spear blades. Toa-do's head is covered with an iron helmet, the top of which is curled like a scroll. One hand wears wood, the other carries an iron mace, the handle is twice as long as Hoi Van's spear. The mace is shaped like a lion's head, bristling with iron nails like spikes. That mace, which weighed hundreds of pounds, Toa-do held gently, like someone holding a bamboo stick. The majestic general of the Yuan dynasty furrowed his eyebrows as thick as brooms and roared like thunder. "That brat wants to stroke the tiger's whiskers. I pity you, you're young, but you kill my vanguard, I have to tear you apart like a goat or a sheep." Toadu's warship approached Hoi Van's ship, causing the small boat to sway. The sky and earth suddenly turned dark. The mace fell on Hoi Van's head like lightning. Hoi Van swung his spear and parried the mace, but Hoi Van's head was dizzy, his legs wobbled, and the whole boat almost overturned. The old general had just turned the boat around and retreated, when the second mace swung down. Toadu stood proudly on the bow of the boat, waving the flag for the following boats to move forward to chase Hoi Van Hao. Toadu chuckled. It is indeed a sign of the Tran family losing their country. They don't have anyone left, so they have to use a kid and an old guy who's about to die. Hoi Van wiped the sweat from his forehead. Looking at his spear bent, Hoi Van said, "It's really strong, but not scary. Soon it will know my hand." Kwok Ton's fleet ran like the wind. Toadu's warship aggressively chased after them. The cheers drowned out the roaring waves. When Toadu chased fast, Hoi Van also ran fast. When Toadu slowed down, Hoi Van also rowed the boat vigorously, and beat the gong and drum loudly. Occasionally he shot arrows to kill a few dozen enemies. The sun was shining brightly. The air became more and more sweltering, making it difficult to breathe. Toadu was so hot that he was furious. Hoi Van saw the Yuan army's ranks in disorder. They compete to drink water. Many of them took off their clothes and put their arms and legs in the water. The oars were less agile. Toadu chased Hoi Van for more than a mile, when suddenly there was an explosion of artillery orders. The young general's army turned around and stood tall, waiting for the Nguyen army. The flag, destroying the enemy's strength to reward the king's grace, fluttered proudly on the bow of the boat, as if poking Toadu's eyes, which were already stinging from the bright light of the sun, and stinging from the dripping sweat. From upstream, a group of large warships roared down. The gongs and drums resound to the heavens and the earth. In the midst of a forest of brilliant flags, there rose high a flag raised on a command ship. The flag reveals 4 words, Chu Van Vong Tran. That large fleet of warships merged with Toadu's fleet. In just a blink of an eye, the warships of both sides were mixed together. Swords and spears collided harshly, sparking flashes of fire, making the harsh summer sunlight even more dazzling. The cry, "Sat that," echoed. The bow of Hoi Van Hao's boat was close to the bow of Toadu's warship. Hoi Van shouted loudly, "Toadu! Now I will make you miserable." Holding the newly replaced spear, Hoi Van used all his strength to stab Toadu straight in the face. Toadu's guards gathered together and grabbed the spear handle. Dozens of warships of the young army surrounded Toadu, some brandishing swords, some spears. Toadu swung his mace and smashed the bag. Toadu's one foot stepped on the bow of Hoi Van's boat and turned it like a pinwheel. The savage cheers of the Yuan army arose. Toadu's warships rushed everywhere. Wherever the mace was swung, pieces of people fell. Hoi Van said to the old general, "We couldn't hit it twice? How? If I can't kill him, I will still be in harm's way." The old general said, "His army seems to be tired. The sun is hot, it's very sluggish. Wait a moment, Toadu will be exhausted, he will win. Must destroy its axe. Its advantage is at the tip of the mace." The vast Ham-Tu gate became chaotic, crowded with boats, pushing each other, chasing each other, spreading out, gathering. Chains of people rolled into the water. The river water is red. The sounds of gongs and drums, shouts, and groans blended into one horrible sound. The battle between the two groups of warships became more and more fierce. Toadu still swung his mace left and right. Toadu rushed in to save a Yuan army warship being besieged by Marquis Hoi Van. Hoi Van glanced at Toadu, guessing that the enemy general was exhausted. Sweat flowed like a stream down his big face, his battle robe was soaked. Toadu's mouth gaped open. Toa Do breathed heavily. The mace still swung up and down, but it was no longer as strong as a wind or a storm. Toa Do's eyes opened wide, his eyebrows furrowed. Toa Do roared as if he wanted to swallow Hoi Van. Toa Do's warship rushed forward. Hoi Van's boat dodged to the side and ran like the wind. Hoi Van's boat also dispersed. Having saved the besieged warship, Toa Do happily chuckled. Hoi Van's boat sails like the wind. Coming to the stern of Toa Do's warship, Hoi Van turned his boat around and jumped onto the enemy's boat. The old general and more than a dozen soldiers also jumped up. The enemy army scattered before Hoi Van's spear. Toa Do was busy fighting from the front when he suddenly heard the sound of his soldiers crying behind him. Toa Do turned around in surprise, but before he could shout, Kwok Tone flew over. Jumping down from the boat's roof, using all his strength, Hoi Van kicked the protective hand carrying the terrifying mace. The mace flew high and fell into the river, water splashing. The officers and soldiers in the surrounding warships cheered loudly. But losing his balance, Hoi Van fell down. Toa Do regretted the mace, roared like a ferocious beast, drew his sword and slashed at Hoi Van who was crawling up. The sword blade flashed. The old general screamed and rushed forward to hug Hoi Van. The sword slashed fiercely at the old general's shoulder. Hoi Van's soldiers rushed forward. Just then, a gunfire command rang out. From a branch of the river, a group of large warships pulled out of Hamtu Mouth, forming a majestic and neat formation. On the leading warship, there was waving a large flag with 3 words, Tong Tru Trung. The loudspeaker rang out, all familiar northern voices. Seeing the shadow of the Song army, Toa Do was startled and confused, not understanding why. Being beaten badly by Hoi Van's soldiers, Toa Do had to jump to another boat. The loud sound of loudspeakers from the Song army's boats seemed to pour into the enemy's ears. To Toa Do, now our Song dynasty has regained our country. Your Kublai Khan has been beheaded. I am General Tru Trung, obeying the orders of the Emperor of the Song dynasty. I am here to help the southern country question your crimes. Our troops are loyal soldiers, only to capture Thot Hon. As for you, you will soon learn that if you surrender, you will have your life saved. If you resist the divine power, you will become headless ghosts. In that case, don't blame me for not telling you in advance. Toa Do's limbs trembled, sweat poured out like a bath. The battle of the Song dynasty opened up. Tru Trung, majestic, waved the flag to order the warships into battle. Tru Trung's armor was shining, and the soldiers standing guard on both sides also had shining armor. Standing behind Tru Trung is an athlete carrying a mace as large as Toa Do's mace. Following Tru Trung's warships, there were countless warships bearing the Song dynasty's name. From generals to soldiers, they wear brocade and luxury like on major holidays, truly the spirit of the winners. Quan Nguyen cried loudly. The Song dynasty has regained its country. We have no more land to bury bodies. The Tran army, we haven't been able to do anything yet, with the Song army coming to help. Even if we fight, we will only buy humiliation. Tru Trung's army was familiar with the Nguyen army's fighting style, advancing skillfully and steadily. Just after entering the battle, they captured a warship from Toa Do. The enemy soldiers and other fleets of warships became even more confused, some ran backwards, some crawled into the boat's compartment, some threw away their weapons, some rushed into the river, some jumped to other boats. Roaring cries were heard, like a cow or a goat whose blood has been cut off. The Yuan army ranks were in chaos. Toa Do's screams were hoarse. But Toa Do's orders were not heard. Chu Van Vong's company of warships loudly chased away the Toa Do army. The sounds of drums and gongs shook heaven and earth. Standing on the bow of his warship, Chu Van Vong waved the command flag with one hand and the drum with the other to control the army. Chu Van Vong's loudspeaker loudly transmitted. Generals and soldiers, let's be determined to fight, to wash away the heavy hatred that has been carried for so long. The mandarins waited, the Duke looked forward. Please join me in our efforts to destroy the Toadu army and sing a triumphant song, so that our reputation will forever be recorded in history books. The Song army came to help us, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Song army and the that invaders dressed alike, don't mistake them for enemies, rush in with the Song army to kill the common enemy. The military officers were on alert, rushing towards the enemy ships. The loudspeaker still resounds loudly. Ignore that army. When they returned, there was no land left. Here, their defeat was clear. Listen to me, give up your teachings and surrender, I will follow God's love of life and forgive you as a blessing. Those people of the Song dynasty who were forced to come here by that army should turn their spears around, attack the national enemy to atone for their sins, and one day they will return to their homeland to reunite with their families. The chaotic Toadu army became even more chaotic. Wherever Tru Trung went, the Song people following the Yuan army jumped into the ranks, cheering as if they had just escaped. Many of the Toadu army's warships could not run because there were no rowers or drivers left. In the cabins of the enemy's warships, the scene was truly tragic. It's boiling hot here, and the human scent is strong. The deck of the boat was slimy with shit and loose vomit. People were lying all over, piled on top of each other, the sick mixed with the dying, the wounded collapsed on corpses. Those suffering from malaria were moaning and groaning next to the cholera-stricken people who were fainting after a bout of vomiting. From the bow of the boat came miserable cries. The sick people fainted in panic. Blood on the roof and both bows of the boat poured down like water, watering those dying people. The enemy soldiers ran down to the boat compartment to hide, their faces were bloodless, their tongues were stiff and speechless. They covered their faces and cried. On Ham Tu Gate, the sound of gongs, drums, and cheers of the Tran and Song armies still sounded like there were thousands of people. Many of Toadu's warships flew the Tran flag. Many fires broke out on this and other enemy warships. The river surface was littered with broken boats, flags, spears, shields, wooden bows, and arrow quivers of the Yuan army. The surface of Ham Tu water turned horribly red under the blinding summer sunlight. Toadu led a group of remaining warships, turned around and sailed downstream to the sea. Talking about Marquis Hoi Van after being rescued by the old general. On the warship that Toadu abandoned to flee to another ship, the Nguyen army collapsed and bowed to Hoi Van, begging to surrender. The weapons they submitted were piled up in front of Hoi Van. Hoi Van did not bother to look at the enemy. Hoi Van hugged the old general, Hoi Van's heart hurt like hell. The old general's right arm was severed from his shoulder, bleeding profusely. The silver beard was also tinged with red blood. Blood seeped into Hoi Van's battle robe. Quoc Ton used his sword to cut off the edge of his robe and tie the wound that a soldier had bandaged with man medicine. Hoi Van looked at the old general, his face sad. But the old general smiled, gently lifted his left arm, pointing to Toadu's fleet of boats running downstream in panic. That group of warships collided with each other, some tilted, some capsized, some were sinking, their masts were crooked, their sails were tattered. The old general said, "Prince, don't be bitter about me anymore. Go chase Toadu or it will run away." Hoi Van says, "Thanks to your teachings, I am here today, and thanks to you, I escaped death today. How can I leave you here? The prince should not follow the usual habits. Go away, leave me here. Toadu is running away. If the prince keeps using it, here is the knife, I will end my life for free." Hoi Van grabbed the knife. The old general said, "Let a brother look after me. And the prince must go. Go get Toadu's head." Hoi Van sent some soldiers to take the old general to a nearby village, then got on his boat and led his troops to chase Toadu. Toadu's fleet of warships had run away. Kwok Ton urged his troops to pursue vigorously, with great difficulty getting through the clutter of enemy boats, blazing fires, masts, and planks of boats floating on the water. Toadu was running downhill, suddenly startled and cried out in pain. A gunfire command rang out. A group of mighty warships blocked the river, making it impossible for a sparrow to fly through. This fleet of warships carried the flag of General Nguyen Khoai. Standing on the bow of the command ship, Nguyen Khoai leaned on a large sword and shouted, "There is no way to Thang Long, no way to the lake. All around are nets of heaven and earth. Toadu, where are you going?" Toadu shouted to the remnants of the army. Behind them they chased. In front of them, they block the road. If you risk your life and break the siege, you may still be alive. With one hand on wood and one hand on spear, Toadu rushed straight in front of Nguyen Khoai's boat, letting arrows shoot around him. Nguyen Khoai also pushed the boat to meet the battle. The general's big sword fell on Toadu's head like heaven. One with a spear, one with a sword, the two fought fiercely, their weapons clashing loudly. Toadu fought while breathing heavily. Toadu's spear became more and more clumsy. Toadu could only resist. Chu Van Vong's warship company has just arrived. Hoai Van went first, the six-letter flag fluttering at the head of the boat. Toadu panicked and jumped onto another warship to escape. The drums and gongs shook. The four faces were Tran Dynasty soldiers. Quan Nguyen was terrified. Some threw down their weapons and knelt down, some jumped into the water, risking their lives to swim to shore. Toadu also jumped into the water. Hoai Van was chasing Toadu, intending to jump after him to capture the enemy general. Nguyen Khoai said loudly, "Wait. Let's see Nguyen Khoai shoot Toadu here." Nguyen Khoai draws his bow. As soon as Toadu emerged from shore, the general's arrow was also shot. The arrow cleverly hit Toadu in the middle of the back. The Nguyen dynasty's tiger general roared, grabbed his arrows and ran away. Toadu staggered, stood up and fell again, fell down and tried to stand up again. King Chu Van ordered Marquis Hoai Van to lead his army on land to chase Toadu. From all the surrounding villages, young men had received secret orders from King Chu Van in advance, carrying sticks to help the army fight the enemy. Old men and women led buffaloes, cows, pigs, and rice to the river to celebrate victory. Among the crowd of people, there was Hoai Van's elderly mother. The lady fled here, waiting day and night for news of her son who went away to defeat the enemy. She heard rumors that at the border gate, there was a very young general carrying a red flag with 6 golden letters. Seeing the flag means the enemy soldiers are terrified. The lady half believed, half doubted, not knowing if it was really her son. Today, the lady heard again that there was a big fight at Hamtu's gate, and under the command of Chu Van Vong Tran Nyat Duat there was a heroic teenager. That young general also carried the 6-letter flag, and rushed into the middle of hundreds of enemy warships as if he were entering an empty space. And the lady's heart was excited. The mother followed her relatives to the river mouth, first to celebrate the military mandarin, then to see the young general. Surely that is my child. I sewed that flag myself. But why did my son become so talented so quickly? Thinking like that, the lady did not dare to believe that the person with the 6-letter flag was her son. The lady walked with a cane. Suddenly, I heard people shouting for joy. People talked to each other, people pointed to a flag flying from the riverbank. Someone cried, "The red flag has 6 golden letters." The mother choked up, looking at the pointing fingers. The flag sparkles in the sunset. The lady opened her eyes wide to see. The lady rubbed her eyes, then looked again, then rubbed them again. In her ear, someone read aloud, "Destroy the enemy's strength, report the king's grace. We're so close." The letters are beautiful and the embroiderers are also skillful. Who is that general? I heard it was Marquis Hoa Van Tran Quoc Ton. The mother shed tears of joy. But the mother's heart sobbed. The mother was speechless. The lady only saw a red flag flashing. And the lady tried to run after her relatives to get close to the flag to see it clearly. But the flag took a different path. The mother ran out of breath but could not catch up with the flag. So tired, the mother sat down on the embankment. Marquis Hoa Van led 600 noble men to chase Toa Du, who was running away, into the sea. The red flag embroidered with 6 golden letters swelled in the brisk summer wind. Under the high-flying flag, swords and spears bristle like fences, tilting in the dust, gradually fading in the falling dusk. Through the forest, through the mountains, through the passes, across the rivers, the 6-letter flag led Hoa Van and 600 brave men on, to places where the shadow of the Nguyen army was still visible. At the end of the work, please support me with the like button and subscribe to the channel to listen to more works.